It was a peaceful Saturday afternoon in the quiet suburban town of Liberty Hills. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows over the neatly trimmed lawns and white picket fences. The hum of lawnmowers and the occasional bark of a dog were the only sounds that filled the air. It was the kind of day where nothing out of the ordinary was expected. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Then, in an instant, everything changed. A loud whoosh followed by a deafening roar of engines shattered the calm. In the small backyard of the Thompson household, a rocket, no bigger than a lawn chair, shot straight into the air. The thin, crooked stream of smoke trailing behind it looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. The noise continued to echo for several seconds, and then silence. The rocket, which had been launched from a patch of grass no bigger than a small garden, was now somewhere up in the sky, too high for anyone to track with the naked eye. "Max, what did you do?" shouted Mrs. Thompson from the kitchen window, her heart racing. She could see her 9-year-old son, Max, standing proudly by the makeshift launch pad in the middle of the yard, his face beaming with excitement. The look of utter disbelief on his mother's face mirrored the confusion and amazement of the entire neighborhood. Max had been working on this rocket for months. What started as a small science project for school had quickly turned into a personal obsession. Armed with a collection of spare parts, some leftover fuel from a local fireworks store, and a steady supply of YouTube tutorials, Max had single-handedly built his own rocket. And now, it had flown. The world was a different place when people dared to dream big, but Max had never thought of it like that. For him, a rocket was just a cool thing to build, something that would let him touch the sky. Of course, no one took him seriously when he first started. His friends laughed, his teachers raised an eyebrow, and his mom couldn't help but remind him to focus on his math homework instead. But the thing was, Max had always been different. While most kids his age played video games or practiced soccer, Max spent his time tearing apart old electronics and experimenting with motors, gears, and anything else he could get his hands on. His heroes weren't baseball players or movie stars. They were engineers, astronauts, and inventors, people who turned ideas into reality. Today, Max had turned his biggest idea yet into something real, and the world was about to take notice. Within minutes, the rocket's unexpected flight was all over the internet. It didn't take long for local news stations to pick up the story, and before long, the footage of Max's backyard rocket launch was trending on social media. Twitter lit up with tweets like, "Is this kid for real?" And "A 9-year-old just launched a rocket. What's next, Mars?" At first, Max was oblivious to the growing storm around him. He was too busy admiring the rocket's flight path, replaying the moment in his head over and over again, imagining what could be possible next. He didn't expect anyone to take it seriously. After all, how could they? Then, something unexpected happened. Elon Musk, the visionary founder of SpaceX and Tesla, saw the viral video. His initial reaction was one of disbelief. A 9-year-old building a rocket in his backyard? It wasn't every day that a story like that appeared on his radar. As someone who had spent years building his own companies from the ground up, Musk knew that genius could come from anywhere. Whether it was in the form of a young boy with a vision or a groundbreaking new technology, talent didn't always come in the packages you expected. He watched the footage again, analyzing the rocket's flight, its trajectory, the makeshift design. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but there was something raw and brilliant about it. Musk immediately tapped out a tweet. This kid might be onto something. Maybe it's time to meet him. #MaxTheRocketKid. The tweet sent shockwaves through the internet. Within hours, news outlets across the world were covering the story. Max was being compared to famous scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs, and everyone was asking the same question. Who was this child prodigy, and what was he going to do next? Back at Max's house, he was just starting to grasp the enormity of what had just happened. He had no idea who Elon Musk was, but he knew that something big was brewing. The messages started pouring in. His friends from school, his distant cousins, even his neighbor from 3 streets down were calling, texting, and commenting. "Max, you're all over the news." His mom, still in shock, walked over and held up her phone. "Max, look at this. she said, her voice trembling. The tweet was everywhere. People were tagging Max in posts, sharing articles, and asking for interviews. Max swallowed hard. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It was just a rocket. Just for fun. His mom looked at him, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. This is big, Max. Do you understand what's happening here? Max could only nod, his thoughts racing. What had he done? And what was coming next? The next few days felt like a whirlwind. The attention grew with every passing hour. Journalists knocked on the Thompson family's door, eager for an interview. News vans parked outside their house. People from across the globe were fascinated by Max's story. They were intrigued not only by the young boy's ingenuity, but also by the idea that something as complex as building a rocket could start in a backyard. But it was Elon Musk's involvement that took the story to a whole new level. Max sat on the edge of his bed, scrolling through his phone when he saw it. A direct message from none other than Elon Musk. "I'd like to meet you, Max. We should talk about your rocket. Let's make it happen." Max's heart skipped a beat. This was no longer a fun science project. This was a challenge, an opportunity, something that could change his life forever. What was he supposed to do now? What could possibly come next? Max didn't know it yet, but his journey was only just beginning. And little did he know, this rocket, this tiny launch from a backyard, was going to bring him face to face with one of the most ambitious men in the world. Elon Musk, the very person who had turned the impossible into possible, was about to test Max's brilliance in ways he never imagined. Max Thompson had always been a little different. While other 9-year-olds were more interested in sports, video games, or spending time with friends, Max had been the kid who'd rather be in his garage, covered in grease and oil, surrounded by a mess of wires, circuit boards, and spare parts. For him, the world wasn't just a place to live. It was a playground, a workshop, and a puzzle waiting to be solved. Born in Liberty Hills, a quiet town where the biggest event was the annual pie-eating contest, Max stood out. His mother, Ann Thompson, was a soft-spoken schoolteacher who spent most of her time trying to keep Max on track with his homework, while his father, Greg, was a mechanical engineer who worked long hours at a nearby industrial plant. They were a family that loved each other deeply, but they often found it difficult to understand Max's fixation on engineering and invention. When Max was younger, his parents had been thrilled by his curiosity. But as the years passed, it became clear that Max's obsession wasn't just a phase. He would take apart anything he could find. Broken radios, old toasters, even discarded bicycles from the neighborhood. He would study them, figure out how they worked, and try to make something new out of the pieces. When he was 5, he had created his first robot, a small, clunky thing made from an old vacuum cleaner, a broken light bulb, and some metal scraps from the shed. It didn't work well, but it didn't matter to Max. He was just excited to see his idea come to life. Max's love for science and technology was so strong that it often left him feeling isolated. While his classmates played on the swings or talked about the latest superhero movies, Max would sit in the back of the class, lost in his thoughts, sketching rocket designs in the margins of his notebook. His teachers often worried about his social skills and tried to push him to be more normal, but Max wasn't interested in fitting in. He just wanted to build things. It was his father who first recognized the spark in Max. Greg had been working at the industrial plant for years, designing parts for machines that barely anyone outside of the factory would ever notice. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and Greg was good at it. He had always dreamed of building something bigger, something that would leave a mark on the world. But life had a way of getting in the way of big dreams, and Greg's focus shifted to supporting his family. Still, he couldn't help but admire Max's relentless drive. One day, when Max was 8 years old, Greg took him to a local rocket launch. It wasn't much, just a small hobbyist group shooting off model rockets in a field. But for Max, it was a revelation. Watching those rockets shoot into the sky, knowing they had been built by regular people, gave him a sense of purpose he had never felt before. That day, Max turned to his dad and said, "I'm going to build a rocket, Dad. A real one, not just a toy." Greg had smiled, proud of his son's determination, but he had no idea how serious Max was. "Well, buddy," Greg said, "if you really want to do that, you'd better start reading a lot of books about physics." And Max did. For the next year, Max's life became a constant cycle of reading textbooks on aerodynamics, watching YouTube videos on rocket propulsion, and spending his free time tinkering with whatever materials he could find. He wasn't just building model rockets anymore. No, Max had set his sights higher. Max's mother, Anne, tried to get him to focus on other things: sports, playing with friends, school, but Max wasn't interested. His parents had always been supportive, but Anne couldn't shake the worry that her son's obsession with rockets might isolate him further. She had always hoped he would develop friendships, learn to socialize with other kids his age. She even tried signing him up for summer camp, but Max hated it. The other kids weren't interested in rockets. They didn't care about how things worked or why the sky was blue. Max felt out of place. Max, Anne would say, you need to stop focusing so much on these rockets. You need to live a little. Go outside. Make some friends. But Max couldn't explain it. The rockets weren't just a hobby. They were his world. Every day, every hour spent working on his projects was a step closer to something bigger. In his mind, he wasn't just building rockets. He was building a future where he could be part of something greater than himself. It was during this time that Max found a mentor, albeit in the most unexpected way. One evening, while browsing online for tutorials on rocket designs, he came across a video of a TED Talk by Elon Musk. It wasn't the first time Max had heard of Musk. His name had popped up on a few science-related websites, but this time, the video caught his attention. Musk's talk about space exploration, innovation, and the future of humanity resonated deeply with Max. He watched the video twice, then 3 times. Musk talked about dreams of colonizing Mars, of making life multiplanetary, and of how technology could change the world. Max's heart raced. This was the future he wanted. This was the reason he spent his nights designing rockets in his bedroom. Musk was speaking directly to him. The next day, Max did something unexpected. He sat down at his computer, typed out an email to Musk, and hit send. Dear Mr. Musk, my name is Max Thompson, and I'm 9 years old. I built a rocket in my backyard. It flew, but I want to make it better. I think I can help make life on Mars possible, but I need your advice. Could you help me? Thank you for reading. I hope to hear from you soon. Max Thompson. Max wasn't expecting a response. After all, who would respond to a letter from a 9-year-old? But he sent it anyway, driven by a feeling deep inside that this was his chance. Little did he know, this email would become the catalyst for the entire journey ahead. Back in the Thompson household, Max's parents were just starting to accept the fact that their son's fascination with space wasn't a passing phase. Greg, though, still didn't fully understand the depth of Max's obsession. He had always been a practical man, focused on the here and now. But when he saw Max working tirelessly on his rocket project, building something with his own hands, something clicked. Greg took a step back and watched his son with a new perspective. You're really serious about this, aren't you? He asked one evening as they sat in the living room, the hum of the TV in the background. Max nodded, his eyes never leaving the plans for his latest rocket prototype. I'm going to build something that changes the world. Max didn't know it yet, but the world was about to change for him. The email he had sent was making its way through the vast networks of social media, space enthusiasts, and tech industry leaders. Soon, it would reach someone who would give him the chance to prove that a kid from Liberty Hills could change the course of history. As he continued to perfect his rocket, Max never imagined that the next step of his journey would be one that would take him far beyond the limits of his backyard. But then again, Max had never been one to think small. Max sat at his desk, fiddling with the rocket's ignition system. His fingers were covered in grease and oil as he carefully adjusted the wiring, ensuring that every connection was perfect. He'd spent the past few weeks tweaking his design, making sure it could fly higher, faster, and longer than any of his previous attempts. Every time he thought he had reached the limit of what was possible, he found a way to push past it. But today was different. Today, something was buzzing in the air, something he couldn't quite place. His phone vibrated on the corner of his desk. It wasn't unusual for his phone to buzz. Max had become something of a local celebrity after his rocket launch a few days ago. But this was different. The name that flashed on the screen made his heart skip a beat. Elon Musk. Max's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the phone, his hands shaking slightly. It couldn't be. It had to be a joke. or a scam? After all, who would take the time to respond to a random 9-year-old? But there it was, a message from the one person who had inspired his every move. "Hey Max, I saw your video. Nice rocket. Let's talk. I think there's a lot we can do together. How about a meeting?" Max read the message again. His mind raced. His stomach flipped with excitement and disbelief. He read it a third time, just to be sure. There was no mistake. The email from a few weeks ago had reached him. Elon Musk had seen his rocket launch, and now he was offering to meet. The idea seemed impossible, yet there it was in black and white. His brain couldn't process it. Was this a dream? Max pinched himself, but the sting in his skin was real enough to snap him back to reality. He was shaking now, not just from excitement but from a rising fear. What if he wasn't ready? What if he wasn't good enough? What if this was a mistake? "Max? Max, what's wrong?" His mother called out from the hallway, her voice filled with concern. She had heard him muttering under his breath and knew something big was going on. Max didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. His heart was pounding too loudly in his chest, and his mind was racing at 1,000 miles per hour. He was just a kid, sitting in his room, building rockets in his backyard. But suddenly, the world had opened up in a way he hadn't imagined possible. A world that didn't just belong to adults, to engineers, to astronauts, but to him. Max's hands were trembling as he typed a quick reply. "Mr. Musk, this is crazy, but I'm ready. When and where can we meet?" He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The next few days felt like a blur of anticipation. Max could hardly focus on anything else. School? Barely on his radar. His friends? He hardly saw them. All he could think about was the meeting with Elon Musk, a man who had turned the impossible into possible. Max spent every spare moment working on his rocket, tweaking it, refining it, making sure that everything was perfect. He had no idea what was going to happen next, but one thing was clear. He had to be ready. And, on the other hand, was nervous. More than just nervous. She was scared. "Max," she said one evening, as they sat at the dinner table, "I don't know if this is a good idea." Max's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He looked up at his mom, surprised by her tone. "What do you mean?" And sighed, placing her hands on the table. "I know how much this means to you. But it's a huge opportunity. You're just a kid. What if you're not ready? What if this is all too much? What if?" "Mom, I'm ready. I've been working for this my whole life." And looked at him, her face softening. She could see the determination in his eyes, the same spark that had always been there, ever since he was small. The spark that made him different from the other kids. She had always tried to protect him, to keep him grounded, but now she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time to let him take this leap. "I just want you to be careful, Max. And remember, no matter what happens, I'm proud of you." Max smiled at her, his usual calm confidence returning. "I won't let you down, Mom. I promise." The day of the meeting arrived faster than Max had expected. It felt like only yesterday that he had sent the email, and now, here he was, sitting in the passenger seat of his mom's old sedan, speeding down the highway towards SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. The feeling in his stomach wasn't one of excitement anymore. It was more like nervous energy, an electric buzz that refused to be ignored. Max looked out the window, watching the sprawling cityscape of Los Angeles fade into the distance. For a moment, he couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to live a different life. A life where rockets weren't just his passion, but his future. His thoughts drifted to the things he'd read in the books, the videos he'd watched of SpaceX launches, and the interviews he'd seen of Elon Musk talking about colonizing Mars. Now, he was about to meet the man who had made all of those dreams feel possible. As they pulled up to the gates of SpaceX, Max's heart rate quickened. The facility was even bigger than he had imagined. Massive hangars stood like giants on either side of the road, and in the distance, he could see the faint outline of a Falcon 9 rocket being prepared for launch. It felt like stepping into a whole new world, one Max had dreamed about for as long as he could remember. And parked the car, and for a moment, the two of them sat in silence. "You okay?" and asked. Max nodded, his throat dry. "Yeah, just wow," and smiled, though her nerves were still evident. Well, let's go meet Elon Musk then. Inside the SpaceX headquarters, the air was thick with excitement and tension. There were engineers, designers, and all kinds of professionals rushing around, working on rockets and systems for upcoming missions. Max felt a little out of place, surrounded by all these people who knew so much more than he did. But as they walked through the halls, a man in a black t-shirt and jeans stepped forward, a broad smile on his face. Elon Musk. Max's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he forgot how to breathe. He had watched Musk on TV, listened to his interviews, and followed his work for years, but meeting him in person was something entirely different. Max, it's great to finally meet you, Elon said, extending a hand. His voice was warm and welcoming, with none of the coldness that Max had imagined in the stories he'd read. Elon seemed like, well, just another guy. A guy who built rockets, sure, but still a guy. Max shook his hand, almost in disbelief. Hi. It's, great to meet you too. I saw your rocket launch, Elon continued, and I think it's pretty impressive. You've got a lot of potential, Max. So, tell me, what's next for you? Max swallowed hard. He had no idea what to say. All of a sudden, his backyard rocket seemed small in comparison to the massive projects going on at SpaceX. But then, he realized something. Next, Max said, his voice growing steadier with each word, I want to help build rockets that can go to Mars. Elon smiled, and Max saw the gleam of something in his eyes. I think we might be able to make that happen. Max had never imagined that his first meeting with Elon Musk would feel so normal. After years of watching Musk's interviews and reading about SpaceX's groundbreaking missions, meeting the man in person should have felt surreal, but instead, it was comfortable. The conversation was easy, as if they were two people who had known each other for years. Elon led Max and his mother through the bustling halls of SpaceX's headquarters, his footsteps quick but purposeful. Engineers and technicians were scattered around, deep in discussion, their focus unwavering. Max couldn't help but stare in awe at the huge Falcon 9 rocket components displayed throughout the building, as well as the models of spacecraft in the lobby. To him, everything here looked like the future, the very thing he had always dreamed of. You know, Elon said, looking over at Max, I built my first rocket when I was around your age. Not as good as yours, though. Yours looks solid. Max smiled, his chest swelling with pride. Thanks, but I still have a lot to learn. I'm just getting started. I can tell, Elon replied. That's why I wanted to meet with you. I've seen a lot of potential in people, but the best engineers are the ones who never stop asking what's next. I think you've got that spark, Max. I like to think of myself as a mentor, but I also want to learn from you. Max's eyes widened. Learn from me? Elon nodded, his smile genuine. I'm always looking for fresh ideas. The way you think about rockets, how you approach problems, it's different from the way the engineers here do it. And sometimes that's exactly what we need. Space exploration isn't just about perfect designs and expensive technology. It's about thinking outside the box. Max's mind was buzzing. His hero, the very person who had ignited his passion for space, was standing right in front of him, telling him that he had something special. But just as quickly as the moment had arrived, the gravity of what was happening hit him. This was no longer just a dream. This was real, and he had a chance to be a part of something bigger than anything he could have imagined. The rest of the meeting was a blur of excitement and possibility. Max had expected to be overwhelmed, but Elon had a way of making everything seem achievable. They talked about Max's rocket designs, his inspirations, and where he saw himself in the future. It was clear that Elon wasn't just humoring Max. He genuinely saw potential. You've got a good understanding of propulsion, Elon said as they sat down in a sleek conference room. But there's more to it than that. You've got the hardware. What about the software? The algorithms that control the trajectory? The communication systems? Max blinked, a little surprised by the depth of the conversation. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about those things before, but hearing them come from Elon made everything feel even more real. Space was no longer some far-off dream. It was something he could touch, something he could contribute to. I've been reading a lot about those things, Max said. I'm working on some software that could help optimize the rocket's flight path. But it's really complicated. I haven't figured it all out yet. Elon grinned. That's what makes it exciting. Every time we think we've got it all figured out, something new comes up. That's why we need young minds like yours to keep pushing the limits. As the meeting continued, Max felt like he was entering a new world. Elon shared stories of early SpaceX missions, of the failures, the setbacks, and the moments of triumph. Max had heard about these things in the media, but hearing them directly from Elon, seeing his passion and resilience, made everything feel tangible. It was a reminder that even the biggest dreams had their obstacles, but that was part of the process. After what felt like hours, Elon stood up and walked toward a large screen mounted on the wall. We're about to test the Starship prototype for a crewed mission to Mars. But we're not just focused on getting there. The real goal is to make life multiplanetary. That's where you come in. Max sat up straighter. Me? You, Elon said, looking directly at him. We're building something bigger than just a rocket. We need a new generation of thinkers, people who are willing to take risks and challenge the status quo. I think you've got what it takes. I'd like to offer you an internship here at SpaceX. Not just any internship, though. I want you to help us design the next generation of rockets, the ones that will take us to Mars. Max couldn't believe what he was hearing. His heart pounded in his chest, and his head spun. This wasn't just an opportunity to build rockets in his backyard anymore. This was a chance to change the course of history. I don't know what to say, Max stammered, overwhelmed. You don't have to say anything right now, Elon said with a chuckle. But think about it. You could work alongside some of the greatest engineers in the world, help design the technology that will take humanity to Mars. You'll learn, you'll fail, and you'll succeed. And who knows? Maybe in a few years, you'll be the one designing the first rocket to leave Earth's orbit. Max could barely catch his breath. The enormity of it all was starting to sink in. But amidst the whirlwind of excitement, something else struck him. This wasn't just about rockets. It wasn't just about getting to Mars. It was about the future. His future. You really think I'm ready? Max asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Elon smiled warmly. I think you're more than ready, Max. You've already built a rocket in your backyard. That takes guts. That takes vision. It's the kind of thinking we need. We need people who aren't afraid to dream big. When Max and his mother left SpaceX that day, it was with a sense of awe and wonder that neither of them could fully put into words. As they drove back home, the silence between them felt different. Anne's expression was soft, filled with pride, but also a deep, almost protective concern. She had watched her son grow from a curious little boy into someone who was about to take on a world much bigger than their small town of Liberty Hills. So, what now? She asked after a while, her voice full of uncertainty. Max, who had spent the entire drive staring out the window, deep in thought, turned to look at her. His face was filled with an expression she had never seen before. Determination, excitement, and a touch of fear. But mostly, there was a sense of purpose. I think it's time to take the next step, he said quietly. I'm going to build the future, the one I've always dreamed about. Back at his garage, Max didn't waste any time. The moment he walked in, he rolled up his sleeves, sat down at his workbench, and got to work. The rocket wasn't finished yet, far from it. But now, it wasn't just a hobby or a dream. It was part of something bigger, something that could change everything. He began to sketch out ideas for the next version of his rocket, the one that would eventually take him to Mars. He pored over his notes from the meeting, his mind racing with possibilities. There were problems to solve, obstacles to overcome, but Max didn't feel afraid. He felt alive. He felt ready. And for the first time in his life, Max knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. Max could hardly contain his excitement as he sat in the passenger seat of his mom's car on the drive home from SpaceX. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and possibilities, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was on the verge of something monumental. He had always dreamed of space, of rockets, of traveling beyond Earth's atmosphere, but now that dream was within his reach. And not just any dream. He was about to work for SpaceX, the company that was shaping the future of space exploration, the company that had revolutionized the way people thought about rockets, and now they wanted him to be part of it. He looked over at his mom, who was driving with a slightly nervous look on her face. She had been proud of him, but Max could tell she was also worried. She had always protected him, made sure he stayed grounded, kept him safe. The idea of him working at SpaceX, with all the high stakes and risks involved, was a big leap for both of them. "Mom?" Max asked, his voice quieter than usual. "Yeah," and replied, glancing over at him briefly. "I'm really going to do this. I mean, it's real. I'm going to work at SpaceX. I'm going to help design rockets that could go to Mars. I'm not dreaming anymore. This is happening." Anne's lips pressed into a thin line, a mix of pride and concern crossing her face. "I know, Max. I know. But it's just so much. It's not like building rockets in your backyard anymore. This is real. This is SpaceX. Elon Musk, real rockets, real missions. You've always been a dreamer, but now, you're making those dreams happen. I just want you to be careful. It's a big responsibility, and I can't help but worry." Max looked at her, his expression full of determination. "I know it's a big deal, Mom, but I'm ready. I've been preparing for this my whole life, and I'm going to make you proud. I'll be careful, but I can't let fear stop me." And nodded slowly, though her eyes were still filled with concern. "I'm proud of you, Max. Always. Just promise me you'll take it one step at a time. Don't rush. You don't have to have all the answers right away. And don't forget to enjoy the journey, okay?" Max smiled at her reassuringly. "I promise, Mom. I'll take it one step at a time. But I won't back down. Not now. Not ever." The first few weeks at SpaceX were a blur. Max was thrust into an environment that was as exciting as it was overwhelming. The headquarters was bustling with activity. Engineers, technicians, and scientists moving about with a sense of urgency, each one focused on their role in the larger mission. Max felt like a small fish in a massive ocean, but he wasn't intimidated. He was hungry to learn, and SpaceX was the perfect place to do that. Max had been assigned to a team of young engineers who were working on a project to improve the efficiency of rocket propulsion systems. It wasn't glamorous work, at least not on the surface, but to Max, it was the stuff that mattered. If he could make a real contribution, even in a small way, it would bring him one step closer to his ultimate goal, getting to Mars. The team members were kind but no nonsense. They didn't treat Max like a kid, at least, not most of the time. They were all working toward the same goal, and age didn't matter. The first few days, Max mostly watched and absorbed everything around him. He asked questions, took notes, and listened to the discussions. He realized just how much he still had to learn, but that only fueled his desire to dive deeper. One afternoon, after a particularly intense brainstorming session, Max found himself sitting with Elena, one of the senior engineers on the propulsion team. Elena was brilliant, a mechanical engineer with years of experience, and she seemed to be a perfect fit for the project. "So, Max," Elena said, glancing at him over her laptop, "tell me more about your rocket. What's your design? What were you thinking when you built it?" Max hesitated for a moment. He wasn't used to talking about his backyard projects with someone so experienced, but Elena's warm, approachable demeanor made him feel at ease. "Well, it's simple, I guess. I didn't have all the fancy equipment or software you guys use, so I just focused on making sure the basics were right. I wanted to design a rocket that could launch, fly, and return safely. My focus was always on safety and reliability." Elena smiled thoughtfully. "I like that. The basics are where everything starts. In fact, most of the time, people overlook that part. They think bigger is better, but sometimes it's the little things that make all the difference. It's clear you've got a solid foundation." Max beamed at the compliment. "Thanks. I try to keep things simple. But I think what excites me most is the idea of making it better, you know? I've learned so much already, and I want to keep improving, keep innovating. Like, imagine a rocket that's more efficient, faster, and can reach Mars without all the extra weight. I want to make that happen." Elena's eyes sparkled. "Now that's the kind of thinking we need. Keep that mindset. You're in the right place, Max. You've got the passion and the drive, and that's half the battle." A few days later, Max was sitting in a conference room with several senior engineers and Elon Musk himself. The room was filled with whiteboards covered in complex equations, models of rockets, and technical diagrams. The meeting was about the future of the Starship program, and the conversation had turned to a discussion about the next steps for human missions to Mars. Elon stood at the front of the room, pointing to a diagram on the whiteboard. We're close to having a fully operational Starship ready for crewed missions. But there's still work to do. We need to make sure that it's not only capable of reaching Mars, but that it's sustainable. We're talking about long-term habitation, life support systems, and the ability to launch, land, and return repeatedly without failure. Max's heart raced. He had been listening to the discussions intently, trying to absorb as much as possible. The technology was mind-boggling, and the stakes were incredibly high. But as he listened, he couldn't help but feel that the dream he had always had was within reach. He was sitting in a room full of the most brilliant minds in space exploration, and he was an active participant. He wasn't just a spectator anymore. He was part of the team. "So, Max," Elon said, turning to him, "I hear you've been working on some ideas for improving propulsion systems. What do you think we should focus on next?" Max's breath caught in his throat. Elon was asking him for his input. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was here, he felt the weight of the responsibility. He glanced at the diagrams on the board, his mind racing as he thought about everything he had learned so far. The pieces started to fall into place. "Well," Max began, his voice a little shaky at first, "one of the things I've been thinking about is optimizing the way we control the fuel flow. If we could make the engines more responsive and precise, it might increase efficiency. That way, we wouldn't need as much fuel, which would reduce the weight and increase the range. Also, we could use lighter materials for the fuel tanks to cut down on weight." Elon listened intently, nodding along as Max spoke. When he finished, Elon turned to the rest of the room. "I think Max is onto something. We need to focus on improving engine responsiveness. Let's look into it." Max's heart soared. He had just made a suggestion that Elon Musk himself had approved. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but for Max, it was a huge step forward. As the days passed, Max's confidence continued to grow. He was learning more than he had ever imagined, and with each new project, he felt himself getting closer to his goal. But as he dug deeper into the work, he realized that the road to Mars wasn't going to be easy. It would require patience, resilience, and a willingness to fail. But Max was ready. He knew that if he kept pushing forward, kept taking risks, he could make the impossible happen. And so, with each passing day, Max continued his journey. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was for sure. He was no longer just a kid with a backyard rocket. He was a part of something much bigger, something that could change the future of humanity. And that, Max thought as he looked up at the stars one evening, was just the beginning. Max had always believed that the hardest part of a journey was the beginning. The excitement of starting something new, the rush of diving into a challenge you've spent years dreaming about. It all seemed so exhilarating at first. But now, sitting in the middle of the SpaceX control room, staring at the vast array of monitors, graphs, and real-time data feeds, Max realized that the real work, the real challenge, was just beginning. He had spent weeks at SpaceX, and the initial thrill of being part of something so massive hadn't worn off. But the gravity of the situation was starting to settle in. This wasn't just about making cool designs or building rockets for fun. This was about real missions, real people, and real consequences. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. Space wasn't forgiving. Space exploration was dangerous. Elon had been clear from the beginning. This was not a game. Mars, the moon, the stars, these were not just distant dreams. They were destinations, and getting there required precision, discipline, and relentless determination. Max had been assigned to work on an experimental propulsion system for the next generation of starships. The new system would allow for greater fuel efficiency, which was critical for long-term missions to Mars and beyond. The concept was ambitious, even by SpaceX standards, and the pressure was mounting. Max sat at his workstation, his laptop open in front of him, the screen filled with complex calculations and diagrams. He rubbed his eyes, trying to clear the fog that had settled in after hours of staring at equations. He was deep in thought when a voice broke through the silence. "Max," Elena's voice rang through his earpiece. "Can you come to the testing bay? We need your input on something." Max pushed back from his desk, relieved to take a break from the screen. "I'm on my way." The testing bay was located on the far side of the facility, and as Max made his way there, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The SpaceX campus was huge, and every corner he turned brought something new and exciting into view. Massive rockets, cutting-edge prototypes, and engineers huddled together in animated discussions. There was no shortage of ambition here. When Max arrived at the testing bay, he saw Elena and a few other engineers gathered around a prototype rocket engine, carefully inspecting its components. The atmosphere was tense. This was no ordinary test. "What's going on?" Max asked, walking up to the group. Elena pointed to the engine, her face grim. "We're testing the new thrust vector control system. If it works, it'll dramatically increase efficiency. If it doesn't, we're going to be facing a significant delay in the Mars mission timeline." Max leaned in, studying the complex setup. The thrust vector control system was one of the most critical parts of the engine. If it failed, the entire propulsion system could be compromised. But Max wasn't scared. This was what he had trained for, after all. The systems, the numbers, the principles of rocket science, it all made sense to him now. He understood how the pieces fit together. "You're testing it live?" Max asked, his voice steady. Elena nodded. "Yeah, we need real-world data to ensure it performs under actual conditions. We've simulated it thousands of times, but there's no substitute for real testing." Max ran his hand through his hair. "Let me check the calculations. If we adjust the fuel mixture slightly, we might be able to stabilize the system a little more." Elena raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" Max didn't hesitate. "The thrust vector system is too sensitive right now. If we modify the fuel flow to increase the pressure in the combustion chamber, it should give us more control. It won't be a permanent solution, but it could stabilize the system for the initial phase of the test." The engineers exchanged looks. Elena considered his suggestion for a moment before nodding. "All right, let's give it a shot. But if this doesn't work, you're going to have a lot of explaining to do." Max smiled. "Don't worry, I've got it." The team quickly made the adjustments to the engine's fuel system, and soon, the countdown began. Max's heart raced in anticipation. This was a big moment. He watched as the engineers prepared for ignition. The room fell silent, and everyone's attention was fixed on the test. 3, 2, 1. The countdown echoed in the bay. The engines roared to life, and Max felt a rush of excitement as the rocket prototype lifted slightly off its testing platform. But then, just as quickly as it began, the engine sputtered and fell silent. The team froze. "Shut it down," Elena shouted, rushing forward. Max's mind raced. They'd been so close, but something had gone wrong. He ran over to the control panel, quickly analyzing the data that was being fed back from the sensors. He could see the problem almost immediately, a pressure fluctuation in the combustion chamber caused by the slight modification they'd made. It wasn't enough to destroy the engine, but it had disrupted the test. "Damn it," Elena muttered under her breath. "We were so close." Max looked at her, his mind working rapidly. "Wait, I think I see the problem. The pressure fluctuation happened too quickly, which caused the ignition to fail. We need to slow down the response time of the fuel injector system. If we can time it better, the combustion should stabilize." Elena's eyes lit up. "You're right. We'll need to recalibrate the injectors to release the fuel more gradually during ignition." Max nodded, already turning back to the testing equipment. "I'll make the adjustment." The next hour was a flurry of activity as Max and the engineers recalibrated the fuel injectors, fine-tuning the system to reduce the pressure fluctuations. As they worked, Max realized something important. It wasn't just about finding the right solution. It was about staying calm, thinking clearly, and working as a team. The stress of failure had been heavy, but instead of backing down, Max and his colleagues had pushed through it together. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they were ready to try again. The countdown resumed. 3, 2, 1, ignition. This time, the engine roared to life, and Max watched with bated breath as the rocket prototype's engines fired smoothly. There was no sputtering, no failure. The propulsion system was performing flawlessly. The thrust vector control system was working. The room erupted into cheers. The team had done it. Max had done it. Elena turned to him, her expression one of pride and admiration. "You nailed it, Max." That was exactly what we needed. Max couldn't help but grin. We did it. All of us. As Max walked back to his workstation that evening, his heart was still racing. He had helped solve a problem that could have delayed the Mars mission, and for the first time, he felt like a true part of the SpaceX team. But even as the adrenaline wore off, Max knew the journey was far from over. The work was only going to get harder. The tests would only get more intense, and the stakes were higher than ever. But in that moment, as he looked up at the stars from SpaceX's observation deck, Max knew one thing for sure. He was ready. He was no longer just a kid with a backyard rocket. He was a part of something bigger, and he had a place in the future of space exploration. Max's success in the testing bay had earned him respect, not just from his team, but from the higher-ups at SpaceX. The propulsion system was working, and that meant one less obstacle in the way of the Mars mission. For Max, the achievement was exhilarating, but it also brought with it a strange sense of responsibility. He had played a pivotal role in making that test successful, but he knew this was just the beginning. Back at his desk, Max was going over the data from the propulsion test, checking every metric, every response. His mind was racing. He had been on cloud nine for a few days after the successful test, but now he was back to work, diving into the details. The stakes were higher than ever. SpaceX was aiming for a crewed mission to Mars in the next few years, and everything, every decision, every calculation, had to be perfect. But something had changed in Max. He wasn't just a kid with big dreams anymore. He was now a critical part of a massive effort to send humans to Mars. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, but it also drove him to work harder than ever before. That evening, as Max was finishing up his work for the day, he received an unexpected message. It was from Elon Musk himself. Subject: great work on the test today. Max, I wanted to personally thank you for your contribution to the propulsion system test. Your insight and quick thinking were crucial to the success of the test. You've proven yourself as a valuable member of the team. Keep pushing forward. The work we're doing here is more than just about building rockets. It's about changing the course of human history, and you're now a part of that. Elon Musk. Max read the email twice. He could hardly believe it. Elon Musk, one of the most influential people in the world, the man who had revolutionized space travel, had personally reached out to him. The weight of the message sunk in. This wasn't just about rockets anymore. This was about humanity's future. The ripple effect of his work was far greater than he had ever imagined. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Max was involved in everything, from reviewing propulsion models to brainstorming ideas for improving the Starship's landing systems. He was learning at an accelerated pace, constantly being challenged by his colleagues and mentors. The team's momentum was unstoppable, and Max was right in the middle of it all. But as the weeks passed, Max noticed something unsettling. The pressure was mounting. SpaceX had committed to an ambitious timeline, with the goal of launching crewed missions to Mars in just a few years. The company's engineers and scientists were pushing themselves harder than ever, and the workload was relentless. Max had always thrived under pressure, but now, even he was beginning to feel the weight of it. One afternoon, as Max sat in a conference room reviewing technical specifications for a new rocket booster, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Anne, his mom. Mom, Max, I need to talk to you. Are you okay? I've been hearing some things, and I'm worried. Call me when you get a chance. Max paused for a moment. His mom's message wasn't like her usual texts. She was always supportive, but this one had a tone of concern. He quickly excused himself from the meeting and dialed her number. Hey, Mom, he said as soon as she picked up. What's going on? Max, and said, her voice tight. I've been hearing rumors about SpaceX and the Mars missions. Some people are saying that things aren't going as smoothly as they should, that there are delays and maybe even risks that people aren't talking about. Max felt a knot tighten in his stomach. I don't know about rumors, but everything's fine. We're making progress. We're ahead of schedule on a lot of things. There are always challenges, but we're handling them. I hope so, and replied, her voice still laced with worry. I just want to make sure you're okay. I know how much this means to you. But Max, you've got to be careful. Space exploration is dangerous. You don't want to get caught up in something that's too big to control. Max took a deep breath. His mom had always been protective, and he understood why. But this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future of humanity. He couldn't let fear hold him back. He had come too far. "I'm fine, Mom. I'm just working really hard. But I promise, I'm not taking any unnecessary risks. SpaceX has some of the brightest people working here, and I'm learning so much. I'm part of something bigger than I ever imagined. And that's worth it." And paused, then sighed. "I know. I just want you to be careful. Don't lose yourself in it. You're still my son, Max." Max smiled, his heart swelling with love for his mom. "I know, Mom. I promise I won't. I'll be careful. Thanks for checking in." Later that night, Max couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his chest. He had reassured his mom, but the truth was, things at SpaceX weren't as perfect as they seemed. There were challenges, failures, and setbacks that no one was talking about. SpaceX was a company that thrived on pushing boundaries, but sometimes, pushing those boundaries came with a price. Max had seen some of the behind-the-scenes struggles, small technical failures that were swept under the rug, tight timelines that left little room for error, and engineers working themselves to the brink of exhaustion. The pressure to succeed was immense. But Max wasn't ready to back down. He wasn't going to let fear or uncertainty stop him from doing his part in shaping the future. He sat up in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. The path to Mars was going to be full of challenges. Some of them would be technical, others would be human. And Max realized that, in a way, he had just begun his own personal journey. The next morning, as Max walked into the SpaceX facility, he was greeted by a new sense of resolve. There was work to be done, and he was going to be a part of it, no matter how difficult or risky it got. Elon Musk's vision for the future was clear. The mission to Mars was the next giant leap for humanity. But what Max was beginning to understand was that the journey wasn't just about getting to Mars. It was about the people, the ideas, and the willingness to take risks along the way. And Max was ready to take those risks. Because, in the end, the greatest rewards came from the most uncertain paths. Max had learned quickly that working at SpaceX wasn't just about building rockets. It was about constant adaptation, handling uncertainty, and facing down obstacles that seemed insurmountable. There were moments of triumph, like the successful test of the propulsion system, but there were also moments of doubt, frustration, and exhaustion. He was no longer just a wide-eyed kid building rockets in his backyard. He was part of an elite team on the cutting edge of space exploration, and that came with immense pressure. That morning, as Max arrived at the SpaceX campus, he could feel the tension in the air. It was a feeling he had grown accustomed to. The atmosphere at the company was always charged with anticipation, but today felt different. There was a quiet urgency hanging over everything. As he walked past the engineers huddled around whiteboards, his mind raced back to the conversation he had with his mom. She had been right to be concerned. He had been pushing himself harder than ever, sometimes skipping meals and working late into the night. But it wasn't just the pressure that had been building. It was the growing awareness that the mission to Mars, despite all the advancements, was still fraught with immense challenges. He couldn't help but think back to the first time he had met Elon Musk in person. Elon had spoken about the monumental challenge of getting to Mars, how the success of the mission was far from guaranteed. The risks were high. The failure of a single component could derail the entire operation, and Max had signed up for all of it. But now, standing at the threshold of history, Max realized the full extent of what that meant. That morning, he was scheduled to meet with some of the senior engineers and Elon Musk himself to discuss the upcoming test flight of the Starship. The plan was to launch a test flight with an uncrewed Starship prototype to test new systems that would eventually support human missions. The launch was just days away, and everyone at SpaceX was on edge, fully aware of how critical the test would be. If it failed, it could push back the timeline for Mars by years. Max walked into the conference room, his mind focused but his heart racing. Elena, who had become a mentor of sorts to him, was already there, her eyes scanning a tablet as she reviewed the flight simulations. "Elena," Max greeted her. "How's everything looking for the test?" She didn't look up from her screen. "A few minor issues with the landing sequence, but nothing we can't fix. The real problem is the launch phase. The new heat shield system is still untested in real-world conditions." Max nodded. He had heard about the new heat shields, designed to protect the Starship during atmospheric reentry, but he hadn't fully grasped how much of a gamble they were. SpaceX was pioneering new technology in real time, and with every test, they were pushing the limits of what was possible. "Have you heard anything from Elon?" Max asked. "Is he as concerned about the heat shields as everyone else seems to be?" Elena gave a small, knowing smile. "Elon's never concerned. He's focused on the big picture. He trusts that we'll find a solution, and if something goes wrong, we'll fix it and move forward. It's why he's the visionary he is." Max wasn't so sure. He had seen Elon up close during the past few weeks, and while Elon had always been calm and composed, there were moments when he could feel the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. This was uncharted territory for everyone, including Elon Musk. The doors to the conference room swung open, and in walked Elon himself. His presence immediately commanded attention. He was followed by a small team of engineers, all holding tablets and laptops, each filled with data and reports. "Elena, Max," Elon greeted them. "How's the prep going for the test flight?" "Better than expected, Elon," Elena responded. "A few minor glitches, but we're ready." Max felt his pulse quicken at the sight of Elon. It was surreal, even after all this time, to be in the same room with the man who had turned space exploration into a private enterprise. He had changed the course of history, and Max was now part of that story. Elon turned to Max. "I wanted to see how you're doing. I know this is a huge responsibility. Are you handling the pressure all right?" Max hesitated for a moment. "I'm doing all right, just a little overwhelmed at times. But I'm ready. We all are." Elon nodded, his face unreadable. "Good. Because the next few years will test every single one of us. The Mars mission is not going to be easy. It's going to be dangerous. There will be setbacks. But that's what makes the success worth it." There was a moment of silence. Elon's words weren't comforting. They were a reminder of the risks involved. But Max appreciated the honesty. He needed to hear that. They were all part of something bigger than themselves, and that meant they would have to face the challenges together. After the meeting, Max found himself in the testing bay, standing next to Elena as the engineers prepared the Starship prototype for its test flight. The atmosphere was tense, charged with anticipation. The test would be a critical moment, not just for the success of the mission, but for the future of SpaceX itself. Max knew that whatever happened during the test flight, it would have a ripple effect. A successful launch would push SpaceX forward, and maybe even inspire the world. But a failure? A failure could set them back years, if not more. As the countdown began, Max stood at the edge of the testing platform, watching the Starship rise in front of him. He could see the entire process in his mind. The ignition, the flight through the atmosphere, the separation, and then the re-entry. Every stage was like a dance, each one dependent on the precision of the others. There was no room for error. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition. The words echoed in the bay. The engines roared to life, and the Starship slowly lifted off the ground, its massive thrusters sending a plume of flame and smoke into the sky. Max's breath caught in his throat as the rocket soared higher. The team cheered, their excitement palpable. But as the rocket reached a critical altitude, something unexpected happened. The heat shield, which had been the focus of so many long hours of work, began to show signs of stress. There was a slight misalignment, a ripple of instability in the re-entry system. The room fell silent. "Elena, what's happening?" Max's voice was low, but there was no hiding the tension in it. Elena was already at the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. "It's not a catastrophic failure, but we've got a problem. The heat shield's not holding up the way we thought it would." Max's heart sank. This was it, the test of resolve. This was where everything could fall apart, or they could rise to the challenge. "We can fix this," Elena said, her voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "We've done simulations for this. We'll adjust the landing sequence and make sure the heat shield is reinforced before the next test." Max swallowed hard. They weren't out of the woods yet. There was still time for things to go wrong, but Elena's confidence was contagious. If they could fix this in time, the mission would continue as planned. But if they didn't, well, the future of Mars, and everything SpaceX had worked for, would hang in the balance. The tension in the room was palpable as Max stared at the monitors. The heat shield issue was more serious than they had initially thought. While the Starship had successfully launched, the instability in the heat shield was a major red flag. Everyone at SpaceX was on edge, knowing that any flaw in the heat shield could spell disaster during re-entry, especially for the eventual crewed missions to Mars. Max's mind raced as he watched Elena and the other engineers work feverishly to make adjustments. This wasn't just a technical challenge, it was a personal one. The work they were doing was cutting edge, but it also carried enormous risks. The future of the mission, and perhaps even the future of space exploration itself, depended on how they responded to this challenge. "Elena," Max said, his voice a mix of urgency and concern, "what's the worst-case scenario here?" Elena didn't look up from her tablet, her fingers moving quickly over the screen as she typed in commands. Worst-case scenario? The heat shield fails entirely during re-entry. The spacecraft would burn up in the atmosphere. We'd lose the prototype, and we'd set the timeline back by months, maybe years. We need to fix this before the next test flight. Max felt a chill run down his spine. Losing the prototype could have serious consequences for the timeline SpaceX had worked so hard to build. But it was more than that. It was the loss of progress, of momentum. He knew how important this test flight was, not just for SpaceX, but for the entire space industry. People were watching, waiting for the success of private space travel to become a reality. He had to act, and fast. As the day wore on, the team worked through dozens of scenarios, tweaking the heat shield's design, analyzing test data, and pushing the limits of the technology. Max found himself falling into a rhythm with the engineers, each of them focused on finding a solution. Time was running out, and SpaceX couldn't afford to lose ground. Max took a step back, trying to clear his head. He stepped outside the lab, the cool evening air brushing against his face. It was a rare moment of quiet. The sun was setting over the SpaceX campus, casting long shadows over the hangars. Max stared at the sky, trying to imagine the future. A future where humans could travel to Mars, where humanity could truly become an interplanetary species. But right now, that future felt distant, like an unreachable dream. The reality was that they were facing an obstacle that could undermine everything they had worked for. And Max wasn't sure what the outcome would be. That night, as he lay in bed, Max couldn't sleep. His mind raced with calculations, with thoughts of failure and success. He remembered his mom's warning about the dangers of pushing too hard. He could feel the weight of those words now. Was this too much? Was he getting caught up in something that was beyond his control? But then he thought about the test, about the people who were depending on him, and the people who believed in the mission. The reality was that space exploration was dangerous. It always had been. It had cost lives in the past, and it would continue to do so in the future. But humanity had always pressed forward. Max knew that if he was going to be part of this revolution, he couldn't shy away from the challenges. The next morning, Max was back in the lab before anyone else. The engineers were already starting to arrive, and the energy in the room was tense but focused. Max felt a surge of adrenaline as he rejoined Elena and the team. Elena greeted him with a nod, but there was no time for pleasantries. The mission was too important. "All right," Elena said, her voice steady despite the urgency. "We've isolated the issue with the heat shield. It's a problem with the material's reaction to high-altitude conditions. We need to reinforce the structural integrity before we can proceed with the next test." Max felt a sense of relief wash over him. They had a fix, but he knew it wasn't going to be easy. SpaceX was about to make a change to one of the most critical systems on the spacecraft with just days before the next test flight. It was a risk, a huge one, but they had no choice. As the day progressed, Max worked tirelessly alongside the engineers, helping to refine the design and reinforce the heat shield. He had become a key part of the team, contributing ideas and solutions that pushed the envelope. The hours blended together in a blur of calculations, discussions, and adjustments. And through it all, Max felt his confidence grow. Despite the enormous pressure, he was starting to feel like he belonged here. He wasn't just the young kid with big dreams anymore. He was part of a team that was doing something that had never been done before. He was part of the future. By late afternoon, the adjustments had been made, and the team was preparing for another round of testing. Max stood alongside Elena, looking over the newly reinforced heat shield system. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time in days, Max felt a glimmer of hope. "We've got this," Elena said, as if reading his mind. "It's going to be close, but I think we're ready for the test." Max nodded. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the engineers double-check everything. The test flight was set for the next day, and everything would come down to this. One test, one chance to prove that they had fixed the problem and were ready to move forward. The following day, the team gathered in the control room, watching the final preparations unfold. Max stood beside Elena, his eyes fixed on the screens in front of him. The Starship prototype stood in the distance, poised for launch. The familiar countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition. The engines roared to life once again, and the Starship shot into the sky, climbing higher and higher. Max held his breath, praying that the adjustments had worked. The next few minutes would be critical. The rocket climbed into the stratosphere, passing through the most intense heat layers. For a moment, Max's eyes were glued to the monitors, watching the heat shield's performance. This was the moment of truth. And then, as the Starship began its descent back toward Earth, the real test began. The heat shield would need to survive the most intense reentry conditions, with the vehicle traveling at speeds that would push the system to its limits. Max could hardly breathe. Time seemed to stretch on forever as the Starship re-entered the atmosphere, the heat shield glowing a faint red as it absorbed the immense heat. The landing sequence began. And then, against all odds, the Starship touched down, its engines firing to slow its descent. It landed smoothly, a small but crucial victory for the team. The room erupted in cheers. The test had been a success. Max's heart raced as he turned to Elena, who was smiling wide. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. It worked. Max felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but he also felt something else, a deeper understanding of what this all meant. They had passed the test, but the road ahead was still long. There would be more failures, more obstacles. But today, they had proven something important. They were capable of overcoming the impossible. And for the first time in a long while, Max felt that despite the dangers, the risks, and the uncertainty, he was exactly where he needed to be. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The success of the Starship test flight sent shockwaves through the SpaceX campus. Cheers echoed through the halls, and engineers high-fived in the break rooms, celebrating the hard-earned victory. The pressure of the past week, the sleepless nights, the near misses, had finally culminated in a moment of triumph. For a fleeting moment, Max felt the weight of all their efforts dissolve into something tangible: success. But that relief didn't last long. Because in the world of space exploration, one victory was just another step forward on a path filled with ever-increasing obstacles. The next test was already in the pipeline. The next breakthrough needed to be made. And in the back of Max's mind, one thought lingered. What comes after success? Max sat in his office late that evening, his eyes staring at a blank screen. The conference call with Elon had been brief but intense. There was no time to celebrate the Starship victory. The mission to Mars was on the horizon, and with it came more complicated questions about the sustainability of the technology, long-term life support systems, and the need for public and private partnerships to keep funding the dream. As he stared at the screen, a familiar ping broke his concentration. It was a message from his mom. "Proud of you, Max, keep pushing, but don't forget to take care of yourself. Space exploration is a marathon, not a sprint. Love, Mom." Max smiled as he read the message. His mom had always been his grounding force. While everyone around him was obsessed with the grandiosity of the mission, she always reminded him that personal well-being mattered just as much as scientific breakthroughs. It was something Max was beginning to realize more as he watched colleagues burn out, working around the clock with no respite. With a sigh, he closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. He needed a break. He needed to reconnect with the world outside SpaceX, his friends, his family, and his sense of self. As much as he loved the mission and felt responsible for it, the pressure to be perfect, to constantly meet the impossible standards set by SpaceX, was suffocating. The next day, Max received an unexpected invitation. It was from his old friend, Ava. She had been with him during his early days of rocketry, back when they were both teenagers building makeshift rockets in his backyard. Ava had recently graduated from MIT and was working on advanced propulsion systems for a different aerospace company. Despite their different career paths, the two had stayed close, texting and catching up on each other's progress. But this invitation felt different. "Max, I know you've been buried in work, but I'm in town. Want to grab coffee? I think we need to catch up. I've got something big to share." Ava. Max was taken aback. Ava had always been ambitious, but her last message had an intensity to it that intrigued him. He didn't think twice before accepting. They met at a small coffee shop not far from SpaceX's headquarters. When Ava walked in, Max immediately noticed the change in her. She was dressed in a sleek, professional outfit, and her sharp eyes sparkled with determination. Ava had always been confident, but now there was a laser-focused energy about her that Max hadn't seen before. "Ava, it's good to see you," Max said, standing up to give her a hug. Ava smiled. "You too, Max. You've come a long way. I've been following your work. I heard about the heat shield breakthrough. Impressive." Max felt a rush of pride at her words, but he didn't let it linger. "Thanks. It's been a crazy ride. How about you? What's going on?" Ava leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been working on something that might change everything. I can't go into all the details right now, but you know how we always talked about the limitations of current propulsion systems? The ones SpaceX is using for Starship? Well, I think I've found a way to improve them." Max's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, you're telling me you've got a new propulsion system? How much better are we talking here?" Ava looked around, making sure no one was eavesdropping. "A lot better. It's an experimental system, but if it works, it could cut travel time to Mars in half. Imagine that, cutting down the time for the entire journey. We're talking about a potential game-changer for long-distance space travel." Max's mind raced. This was huge. He knew the propulsion systems SpaceX was using for Starship were powerful, but there were always limitations when it came to efficiency and speed. A propulsion breakthrough like the one Ava was suggesting could drastically alter the future of Mars missions and the future of human space travel altogether. "Ava, that's incredible. But why aren't you working on this with SpaceX?" Max asked, his voice filled with curiosity and concern. Ava sighed, a shadow passing over her face. "SpaceX is great, but they're focused on their current timeline. I've been working on this independently, but it's not something they're ready to jump into yet. They've got their own direction, and right now, they're focused on refining what they already have." Max nodded. He knew that SpaceX was always focused on their immediate goals, and any deviation from that path was met with resistance. But still, if this propulsion system was as good as Ava claimed, it could accelerate everything they were working on. "So, what now?" Max asked. Ava took a deep breath. "I want you to help me test it. If it works the way I think it will, it could be the breakthrough we need to make the Mars mission a reality much sooner than anyone expects. I know you've got connections at SpaceX, Max. We could get them on board if we can prove it." Max felt a mix of excitement and hesitation. On one hand, the potential of Ava's propulsion system was staggering. On the other, he was deeply loyal to SpaceX and to Elon. He had worked tirelessly alongside his colleagues to make the Mars mission a reality, and any deviation from that path felt like a betrayal. "I don't know, Ava. I'm in deep with SpaceX right now. This mission, it's everything. I can't just walk away from that." Ava's expression softened. "I get it. I know you're dedicated. But think about it. If we succeed, we'll change the course of history. You'll be part of something bigger than what's happening at SpaceX. We can make the Mars mission happen faster. We can do more than anyone thought possible." Max's heart raced. This was the kind of challenge he had always dreamed about, a chance to be part of something that would redefine the future of space travel. But it came with a huge risk. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Would helping Ava jeopardize his place at SpaceX? Or could this be the next step in the evolution of their mission? As the conversation went on, Max found himself torn between two worlds. The world he had built at SpaceX, where he was part of a cutting-edge team with a singular vision, and the world Ava was offering, where innovation could happen on his terms, unburdened by the constraints of corporate timelines. In the end, Max knew there was no easy answer. But one thing was clear. The future of space travel wasn't about sticking to one path. It was about pushing boundaries, taking risks, and finding new ways to make the impossible possible. Max couldn't sleep that night. Ava's offer replayed in his mind. A looping reel of opportunity, risk, and loyalty. The stars above his bedroom window seemed closer tonight, as though they were beckoning him towards something larger than the path he had been walking. He had spent years working toward the Mars mission, striving to be a part of something that would change humanity's future. But now, standing at this crossroads, Max was starting to wonder. Was the future of space exploration tied to one company, one mission, or was it larger than that? He rolled over in bed, trying to clear his mind. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, and he reached for it automatically. Elon Musk, Max, we need to talk tomorrow. Urgent. Come by the office at 9 a.m. Max's stomach tightened. He had always respected Elon, admired him even, but now that he had been working closely with the company, he knew how intense their conversations could get. Elon didn't waste time, and he expected results. Max, sure, I'll be there. He sat up and stared at the message for a moment longer. Was this conversation about the recent Starship success? Or was it about the next phase of the Mars mission? What if Elon had some news that would change everything? News that could make all of this moot? The thoughts rattled around in his head as he lay back down, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about Ava's proposal. She had the kind of passion Max admired, an unrelenting drive to make space travel better, faster, more efficient. It wasn't just about Mars for her. It was about the long-term vision of human exploration, and she believed, like Max did, that the current propulsion technologies were too limiting. The next morning, Max arrived at the SpaceX headquarters a little earlier than usual, his mind still preoccupied with his conversation with Ava. He passed through the security gate and entered the main building, the hum of activity around him almost deafening. SpaceX was a place where innovation never stopped, where every minute counted. He took the elevator to Elon's office, his palms sweating slightly. The doors opened, and he stepped out into the hallway. Elon's office was at the end, where the walls were lined with pictures of rockets, Mars, and various milestones. It had a futuristic yet minimalistic vibe, the kind of place where world-changing decisions were made. Max knocked on the door. "Come in," Elon's voice called. Max entered, and Elon looked up from his desk. He didn't immediately smile or offer pleasantries. There was no small talk. Elon's eyes were sharp, calculating, always looking toward the next challenge. "Max," Elon said, motioning to the chair across from him. "Have a seat." Max did, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what this meeting was about, but he knew it was important. "I'm sure you've heard," Elon began, "that SpaceX is moving ahead with a new phase of the Mars mission. We're on track with Starship's development, but there's one thing that's become clear in recent weeks. We need to accelerate our timelines. I don't want to wait 10 years to get to Mars, Max. I want us there in half that time." Max leaned forward, intrigued. "I agree. I mean, we've made great progress, but there's so much more to do." Elon nodded, tapping his fingers on the desk. "Exactly. That's why I need you to spearhead a new initiative. We've been looking at propulsion systems, life support, and resource utilization for the Mars mission. And we're ready to move to the next phase. This isn't just a one-way mission anymore, Max. It's about creating a self-sustaining colony. And for that, we need better, faster propulsion." Max's pulse quickened. It was the same thing Ava had been talking about, faster propulsion, but now, it sounded like Elon was on the same page. "I'm listening," Max said. Elon's gaze became even more intense. "I need you to lead the integration of new propulsion technology into Starship. I've been in talks with some people about it. We're bringing in experts from other sectors, and I want you at the helm. I'm confident you're the right person to make this happen." Max's mind raced. This was the opportunity he had dreamed about, working directly with Elon on the future of space travel. It was everything he had been working toward, but there was still something tugging at him. "Elon, this is a huge responsibility, but there's something else I need to tell you. I've been talking to someone I trust. Ava. She's working on a new propulsion system, and it could cut the travel time to Mars in half. I'm talking about a breakthrough, Elon. Something that could change everything." For a moment, Elon was silent. Max felt the weight of his words hanging in the air. The room seemed to shrink as he awaited Elon's response. Finally, Elon looked up, his expression unreadable. Ava, huh? I've heard of her. Smart, innovative. But she's not working for SpaceX, is she? No, Max said. She's working independently, but this is something big. Something that could drastically improve our timelines. Elon leaned back in his chair, studying Max carefully. So, you're telling me you want to explore a different propulsion system outside of what we've been developing here? You want to divert resources from our current mission for a maybe? Max's throat tightened. It's not just a maybe. It's something with real potential, Elon. I wouldn't bring it up if I didn't think it could make a difference. Elon's eyes narrowed. Max, we're committed to our current path. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we can't afford to chase every new idea that comes along. We have a clear mission, and we're sticking to it. Max's heart dropped. He had expected some pushback, but this was more than he had anticipated. I understand, Max said quietly, but you know the stakes. If we're going to make it to Mars in any meaningful way, we need to think beyond the current limits. That means embracing new technology, even if it means going off script. Elon stood up, walking over to the window. He stared out at the vast SpaceX campus, as if weighing something heavy. After a long pause, he turned back to Max. You're right, Elon said. But if you want to go down this path, it's going to be a huge risk. I need you to decide. Will you stay with the SpaceX mission and push forward with what we've been developing? Or will you take a chance on this new propulsion system with Ava and risk everything we've built? Max felt his pulse race. This was it, the moment of truth. He had worked his whole life to be part of the SpaceX mission, to be part of the team that would make humanity a multiplanetary species. But Ava's propulsion system could truly change the game. This wasn't just about Mars anymore. It was about the future of space exploration as a whole. Max stood up, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He had to make a choice, and make it fast. I'll think about it, Max said, his voice steady despite the storm in his head. Elon nodded, his face unreadable. Take your time, Max. But understand this decision isn't just about the mission. It's about the future. As Max walked out of Elon's office, the weight of the decision pressed down on him harder than ever. Would he remain loyal to SpaceX and continue to push forward with their current plan? Or would he take a risk on Ava's groundbreaking technology, knowing that doing so could change everything? Max sat in his car, staring out the windshield at the busy SpaceX campus. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the buildings. But inside him, everything felt murky, like a storm was brewing just beneath the surface. He had just left Elon's office, and the weight of the decision he had to make hung over him like a thick fog. What did it mean to be loyal? What did it mean to break from everything you'd worked for to chase something new, something unknown? His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. He checked it. It was a message from Ava. Ava, I know you've got a lot on your plate, Max. But remember, sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from taking the hardest risks. If you're in, I need to know soon. Max read the message twice, his mind racing. He couldn't deny the pull he felt toward Ava's idea. The potential of her propulsion system was enormous. It could transform the entire trajectory of human space travel. But it wasn't just about that. It was about the vision she had, the same kind of idealistic, audacious dreams that had gotten him into rocketry in the first place. But then, there was the other side, SpaceX. SpaceX was more than just a company to Max. It was a movement. It was Elon Musk's dream, and in many ways, it had become Max's own. The Mars mission wasn't just a destination. It was a philosophy, a testament to what humanity could achieve when it aimed for the stars. Max had spent years building that dream alongside Elon and the team, and leaving now felt like abandoning something monumental. But could he live with himself if he didn't take this chance? Could he ignore the possibility of accelerating the entire mission and changing the timeline of human exploration? He set the phone down, took a deep breath, and stared out at the lights of the city in the distance. He needed clarity. He needed to think. Later that evening, Max sat in the quiet of his apartment, a coffee cup cooling beside him as he stared at a wall of mission posters, charts, and blueprints. A map of Mars was pinned next to a picture of SpaceX's Starship prototype soaring toward the heavens. He felt the weight of these images, of the history they represented, of the dreams they captured. But now, staring at them, he was no longer sure if they were the answer. He could picture it in his mind. Starship, launched into space, its engines roaring as it hurtled toward Mars. It was everything he had ever wanted. But then, another picture flashed in his mind, the one of Ava's propulsion system, a system that could cut the journey to Mars in half, a system that could revolutionize space travel for decades to come. His phone buzzed again. Ava, I'm not asking for a yes right now, but if you believe in what we're trying to do, if you believe in the future of humanity in space, you need to make the decision now. We can't afford to wait. Max leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He had to decide, and he knew that whatever choice he made, there was no turning back. The next morning, Max arrived at the SpaceX campus early. His mind was made up, but he needed to prepare himself for the conversation ahead. He couldn't just drop everything. There would be consequences, both professionally and personally. He met with a few of his colleagues as he walked through the halls, all of them talking excitedly about the next steps for Starship. Max smiled and nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. It wasn't just about the technology anymore. It was about the kind of legacy he wanted to leave behind. When he entered Elon's office, Elon was already at his desk, reviewing reports. He looked up, his gaze sharp. Max, Elon said, his voice steady. You've made up your mind? Max hesitated for a moment, but then he spoke, his voice clear. Yes, I've thought about it, and I think I have to take the risk. I'm going to work with Ava on the new propulsion system. Elon didn't say anything for a moment. His face was unreadable, and Max could feel the weight of his gaze. You're sure about this? Elon asked. There was no anger, no frustration, just a deep, probing curiosity. I am, Max said. I think this could change everything. The propulsion system Ava's developed, it's something that could make the Mars mission a reality much sooner. It could change the entire landscape of space travel. Elon sat back in his chair, considering Max's words. He didn't seem angry, but Max could tell he was weighing something heavy in his mind. You know this is risky, Elon said quietly. You're walking away from everything we've built here, from what we've been working toward for years. If you do this, you're betting against the future of SpaceX itself. Max nodded. I know, but sometimes, in order to move forward, you have to take risks. This isn't about going against SpaceX, Elon. It's about accelerating the future of space exploration. Elon's eyes flickered with a strange kind of respect. You're right. It's just, I didn't expect you to be the one to take that step. Max didn't know what to say to that. He had always respected Elon as a mentor, and the thought of leaving SpaceX stung. But he knew that this was the right move for him, perhaps even for the future of humanity in space. Do you want me to take this back? Max asked. I can walk away if you think it's best for the company. Elon looked at him for a long moment, as though weighing the cost of Max's decision. Finally, he spoke, his voice softening. No, Elon said. I don't think you should. But know that you're taking a huge gamble. If it pays off, you'll change everything. If it doesn't, it could end your career in the blink of an eye. Max felt the full weight of Elon's words. There was no middle ground. This was all or nothing. I'm willing to take that risk, Max said, his voice firm. I've got to follow my instincts on this one. Elon leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. Then go. But don't come crawling back when things get tough. Max's heart pounded in his chest. He stood up, feeling a mixture of excitement and fear as he walked toward the door. He had made his decision. He had chosen the road less traveled, and now there was no going back. As he stepped out of Elon's office, Max felt the heavy responsibility settle on his shoulders. He wasn't just leaving SpaceX behind. He was stepping into the unknown. But deep down, he knew it was the right choice. Max took a deep breath and pulled out his phone as he walked down the hall. He tapped out a quick message to Ava. Max, I'm in. Let's change the world. The days following Max's decision felt like a whirlwind. The excitement of taking a leap into the unknown was tempered by a constant undercurrent of uncertainty. He had said goodbye to his old life at SpaceX, to the mission that had defined his career. And now, He was venturing into uncharted territory, alongside Ava and her team, to make a propulsion system that could change the future of human space exploration. Max had always believed in the impossible, but this felt different. This was a dream that could either soar into the heavens or crash and burn. He wasn't just betting on technology. He was betting on himself, on Ava, on a future that he couldn't quite predict, but felt deeply compelled to pursue. Ava had told him that her team had already made substantial progress, but there was still a long road ahead. The propulsion system she had developed was based on principles that had long been theoretical, but if they could make it work, it would fundamentally alter the course of space travel. The theoretical model was one thing. Actually making it a reality was something else entirely. And that was where Max came in. He arrived at the small, secure facility in the outskirts of San Francisco, where Ava's team had been working. It was far more modest than SpaceX's massive, bustling headquarters. This was a place of innovation, but also one of secrecy. The kind of place where you could hear the hum of machinery and feel the quiet hum of possibility in the air. Max had spent a week doing his due diligence, looking at Ava's designs, her calculations, and her team's work. He had been impressed. But now, seeing it all in person, he couldn't help but feel the enormity of the task before them. When he walked into the main lab, Ava was standing at a whiteboard, surrounded by several engineers. She was in her element, drawing out equations that made Max feel like he was back in his college days, when he'd first fallen in love with rocket science.
Max,
Ava said, her eyes lighting up as she noticed him. Glad you're here. We've made a few key updates since we last spoke. You'll want to see this. Max nodded, trying to contain his enthusiasm. I'm ready. Ava led him over to a table where several diagrams were spread out. The propulsion system, known as Project Vanguard, was based on a new type of ion engine that would use an ultra-compact magnetic field to accelerate ions to speeds that had never been achieved before. Theoretically, it would allow spacecraft to travel far faster than the current propulsion systems in use today. There's a lot of work ahead, Ava explained, pointing to a complex series of calculations on a nearby screen. But the prototype is in its final stages. If we can get the magnetic containment system to work as expected, we'll be able to achieve speeds that could cut travel time to Mars in half. Max studied the screen intently. You're saying this could get us there in 2 to 3 months instead of 6 to 9 months? Ava smiled. Exactly. But there are still a lot of obstacles. First, the containment system has to hold up under intense electromagnetic forces. We've been tweaking the magnetic fields, and we've seen some encouraging results, but there's still a lot to test. Max nodded, feeling the weight of the challenge. Sounds like we're up against the clock. But if we get this right, if we make this work, it's a game changer. That's what we're all thinking, Ava said, her tone serious. But I won't lie, it's a gamble. No one's ever done anything like this before. Max took a deep breath. Well, that's the kind of challenge I live for. The next few weeks were a blur of hard work. The team was small, only a handful of engineers and scientists, working in secret to bring Project Vanguard to life. Max had quickly integrated into the team, providing expertise in propulsion and material science, helping to design the components needed to withstand the extreme conditions of space travel. But as the weeks passed, Max began to feel the pressure. Ava was pushing him and the team to think bigger, to take risks. The stakes were so high that every failure felt like a personal blow. They had to make it work. There was no backup plan, no easy way out. The breakthrough they were working on could be the key to faster-than-light travel in the future, but they had to get the fundamentals right first. Max was no stranger to setbacks, but it felt different now. With each failure, he could hear echoes of doubt creeping in. Was this really the future? Or was he chasing a fantasy? One afternoon, as Max was poring over some calculations, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Ava standing there, her arms crossed. "We need to talk," she said, her tone serious. Max stood up and followed her to a quieter corner of the lab. "What's going on?" Ava's eyes were filled with concern. "We've hit a snag. The containment system isn't holding up under the power output we need. It's been unstable, and I'm not sure how to fix it without completely reworking the design. We've reached a breaking point." Max's heart sank. He had seen the signs of stress in Ava over the past few days, but he had hoped it was just the usual tension of working on a groundbreaking project. "So, what's the next step?" Max asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Ava hesitated. "I'm not sure. If we can't stabilize the containment system, everything we've worked on could fall apart. We might have to scrap the entire system and start over." Max's mind raced. He knew how much was riding on this, how much they had already invested, both personally and professionally. But he also knew that they couldn't afford to make mistakes at this stage. The project was on the verge of failure, and if they didn't find a solution soon, all of their work might be for nothing. "We can't give up now," Max said, his voice firm. "Let's take a step back. We need to reassess the entire system. Maybe there's something we missed." Ava nodded slowly, but there was a shadow of doubt in her eyes. "I hope you're right, because if we can't figure this out, there's no way we're getting anywhere." Max could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. It was one thing to take risks, but it was another to fail. And if they failed now, the implications would be enormous, not just for the project, but for his career, for his future. But Max wasn't ready to give up, not yet. He turned to the whiteboard and began scribbling down some equations. He needed a fresh perspective. Maybe there was something in the data that they hadn't fully understood. Maybe they were looking at the problem the wrong way. As Ava watched him, she said quietly, "You really think we can fix this?" Max paused, looking at her. "I don't know, but I'm not ready to throw in the towel just yet. We've come too far to stop now." Over the next few days, Max and Ava dove deeper into the issue. They rewrote algorithms, recalculated energy output, and ran simulations. Slowly but surely, the pieces began to fall into place. The breakthrough they had been waiting for finally came in the form of a small adjustment to the magnetic field's frequency. It wasn't the solution they had expected, but it was the one that worked. When they tested the system again, it held steady. For the first time in weeks, the room was filled with the sound of quiet celebration. Ava turned to Max, her eyes alight with relief. "We did it," she said. Max couldn't help but smile, the weight on his shoulders lifting slightly. They had done it. But as the team celebrated, Max knew that this was just the beginning. There were still many hurdles ahead, and the road to success would not be easy. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like they were on the right path. The future of space exploration was within their reach, and they weren't going to stop until they had changed the course of history. It had been 2 weeks since the team's breakthrough. The propulsion system, Project Vanguard, was more stable than ever before. Ava's team had made enormous strides in testing the magnetic containment system, and for the first time since Max had joined, the future of their mission seemed certain. They were on the cusp of something monumental, a game-changing propulsion system that could accelerate humanity's journey to Mars and beyond. But despite the progress, Max couldn't shake a feeling of unease. There was still so much to do, and though their system was working in theory, it had yet to be tested in real-world conditions. They needed to test it in space. The tension in the lab was palpable. Ava was hyper-focused, always pushing the team to meet the next milestone, and the rest of the engineers were running around with a new energy, each of them energized by the potential of their work. Even Max found himself staying late, running simulations, and tweaking the design where necessary. Still, as much as he was committed to the project, something was gnawing at him. Then, one morning, as he was standing over a console reviewing performance data, a familiar voice broke through the hum of the lab. "Max, we need to talk." Max turned and saw a man in a dark suit standing by the entrance of the lab. His face was familiar, but it took a second for Max to place him. "Eric?" Max said, his voice faltering. "What are you doing here?" Eric Coleman was an old colleague from his days at SpaceX. He had been a senior strategist, working closely with Elon on some of the company's most ambitious plans. But what was he doing here, at Ava's lab? The last time Max had seen him, Eric was a loyal member of SpaceX, and now, it seemed, he was here on some kind of mission of his own. "I didn't expect to find you here," Eric said, his expression unreadable. "I thought you were still with SpaceX. But clearly, you've made a new choice." Max felt a strange mix of emotions: surprise, confusion, and something else. "What's this about, Eric? Why are you here?" Eric looked around the lab. "I've been following your progress, and I think you know why I'm here." SpaceX is very interested in Project Vanguard. More specifically, they want it. They want you to come back and bring the propulsion system with you. Max felt the blood drain from his face. The words hit him like a ton of bricks. You're here to bring me back? To convince me to return to SpaceX? Eric nodded, his gaze unwavering. Elon is interested in the work you're doing here. He thinks the propulsion system you've developed could revolutionize the Mars mission. But he doesn't want anyone else getting there first. Max felt a flash of anger stir in his chest. He had left SpaceX because he believed in the future that Ava had envisioned, not the one that Elon was chasing. This wasn't just about technology, it was about vision, about the possibility of creating something that would change the world. SpaceX had always been about the mission to Mars, but what if there was a bigger picture? I don't think you understand, Max said, his voice firm. Ava and I are not just trying to make a faster rocket. We're trying to change the way humanity thinks about space travel. This isn't about SpaceX. This is about something bigger. I'm not going back. Eric's eyes narrowed. You think SpaceX is just about Mars? You think they're just focused on getting a rocket to another planet? Elon doesn't think small, Max. You know that. And you know this propulsion system has the potential to change more than just the Mars mission. You've seen the numbers. You've seen what it could do. You think Ava is the only one who can bring that vision to life. Max stared at him, the words sinking in. Was Eric right? Was he being naive? SpaceX had the resources, the reach, and the infrastructure to make this kind of technology a reality, maybe even faster than Ava's lab could. But could he really go back to a company that had a narrow focus on Mars when the possibilities stretched far beyond that? No, Max said, shaking his head. I made my choice, and I believe in this. I believe in what we're doing here. Ava and I are going to take this to the next level together. Eric's face hardened. You're making a mistake. You'll regret it. You can't change the world without the right backing. And you know that SpaceX is the only one that has the power to make this happen on the scale you're dreaming about. Max stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. I'm not going back to SpaceX, Eric. Not now, not ever. Eric didn't respond immediately. He simply turned and walked toward the door. Before he left, he paused and looked back at Max. Don't say I didn't warn you. As the door shut behind him, Max felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The encounter with Eric had left him rattled, but it also solidified something deep inside him. He was on the right path. He wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how influential, change his course. Later that day, Max found Ava in her office, poring over the latest data. Her eyes were bloodshot from long hours in the lab, but her focus was unwavering. Everything okay? She asked, noticing the serious expression on his face. Max sat down across from her, trying to keep his voice steady. Eric Coleman came by today. He wants me to come back to SpaceX. Ava's expression flickered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. I figured they'd make a move sooner or later. Did he make an offer? He wants the propulsion system, Max said, leaning back in his chair. And he wants me to come back. He says SpaceX can bring the vision to life faster than we can. Ava didn't flinch. Instead, she gave him a small smile. That's what I thought. SpaceX has the resources, the funding, the infrastructure. They're a powerhouse. But they also have a very narrow focus. They'll never see the bigger picture the way we do. Max nodded, but something still lingered in his mind. Do you think we're on the right path? I mean, can we really pull this off without the kind of support they have? Ava looked at him for a long moment. Max, we're already doing it. You're doing it. Look at what we've achieved. SpaceX might have the money and the manpower, but we have something else, vision. And that's what will carry us forward. We're not in this for the glory or the recognition. We're in this to change the world. Max's doubts slowly began to fade. Ava was right. They were doing something that went beyond anything SpaceX had imagined. They were building a future, not just a rocket. Max stood up, feeling the weight of the decision lift off his shoulders. Then we keep going. No turning back. Ava smiled. Exactly. We keep going. Max had never been one to shy away from pressure. But as the day of the first real test for Project Vanguard loomed closer, he found himself feeling an unfamiliar sense of unease. The propulsion system was finally ready for its first test launch, a real-world trial, not just in the lab, but in a controlled environment where everything could go wrong. They had crossed countless technical hurdles, but this was the moment of truth. Ava had already made it clear that this test launch was their chance to prove that they weren't just building a theoretical system, but something that could actually work in space. If the system didn't perform as expected, everything could come crashing down. The funding, the support, the dream. It would all be at risk. The team had spent the last few weeks preparing the test site. It wasn't a massive launch pad like SpaceX's, but it was secure and isolated enough to run a test without attracting attention. Max had been overseeing the installation of the new containment system, which had been adapted for use in a small, unmanned prototype spacecraft. The system needed to run through its paces, and Max needed to be absolutely sure that nothing would go wrong. The days leading up to the launch were a blur. The lab was a hive of activity, engineers double-checking every component, software coders running simulations, and Ava making last-minute adjustments. Max barely slept, often staying up late into the night, going over the calculations and ensuring that every variable had been accounted for. And then, the morning of the launch arrived. Max stood at the control console, his eyes fixed on the readout in front of him. Ava was at his side, her gaze equally focused. The rest of the team was gathered around, each of them anxiously awaiting the test. There was no room for error. Every action they took now would determine whether their work would be hailed as revolutionary or labeled a failure. Max glanced over at Ava. She was as calm as always, but he knew she had to be feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about the propulsion system anymore. It was about the future they'd envisioned together. About proving to the world that they could do more than just follow the path laid out by companies like SpaceX. They were trying to chart a new course. "Are we ready?" Max asked, his voice low but steady. Ava gave him a small nod, her lips curling into a determined smile. "Ready as we'll ever be." Max took a deep breath and pressed the launch button. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence in the room felt like an eternity. Then, with a soft hum, the prototype spacecraft's engines powered up. The containment system activated, and the propulsion system began to hum with energy. The screens around them blinked to life, displaying real-time data as the system came online. The ion thrusters glowed, pushing the craft forward with a force that was almost imperceptible but steady. Max's heart raced as he watched the data pour in. The system was working. Every metric was within the expected range. The propulsion system was stable, the magnetic containment field holding firm under the pressure. The craft was moving, slowly at first, but steadily. The room was filled with tense silence as the team watched, waiting for the moment when everything would either fall into place or spiral out of control. Then came the first sign that something wasn't right. A warning light flashed on the control panel. Max's heart skipped a beat. "Max, what is that?" one of the engineers asked, pointing at the screen. Max's eyes scanned the data quickly, searching for the anomaly. It wasn't a massive failure, but it was enough to cause concern. The magnetic field was fluctuating slightly. The containment system wasn't fully stable. A small irregularity, but if it wasn't addressed, it could lead to something far worse. Max's mind raced. "Shut down the ion engines now," he barked. Ava moved fast, relaying the order to the team, and within seconds, the thrusters powered down. The humming stopped, and the screens showed a steady decline in the anomaly. Max leaned forward, trying to make sense of what had gone wrong. "This is just a glitch," Max muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "We can fix this." Ava turned to him, her face serious. "Can we? Is it safe to proceed?" Max stood frozen for a moment. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The test was far from perfect, but they hadn't lost the craft. The system hadn't failed entirely. This wasn't the disaster he'd feared, but it wasn't a success either. "We can fix this," Max said, more confidently now. "Let's give it another try. We're too close to stop now." The next few hours were spent troubleshooting. Max, Ava, and the team worked furiously to diagnose the issue. The problem lay in a slight misalignment of the magnetic field's resonance frequency. It wasn't a catastrophic error, but it was a key factor in maintaining stability at higher output levels. They had to recalibrate the system and adjust several parameters in the magnetic field's operation. By late afternoon, they were ready to try again. The second launch attempt was a tense moment. Max and Ava exchanged a quick glance before Max pressed the button again. This time, when the thrusters powered on, the system held steady. The craft moved forward, its trajectory stable. Max's breath caught in his throat. The thrusters powered up smoothly, and the spacecraft accelerated as the propulsion system began to perform as expected. The magnetic containment held firm, the readings showing that everything was functioning at an optimal level. "We're in business," Max said, allowing himself a rare smile. Ava's face broke into a grin. "We did it." The room erupted into cheers. Max felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was quickly replaced with a surge of excitement. The work they'd done, the countless hours of preparation, the sleepless nights, it had all led to this moment. They had done it. Project Vanguard was a success. But even as they celebrated, Max knew that this was only the beginning. The test launch had been successful, but it was just the first step. They still had months of work ahead of them, full-scale prototypes, space testing, and eventually, the integration of the propulsion system into real missions. There was so much to do, and the road ahead would be difficult. But today, they had proven that their vision was more than just a dream. They had proven that they could change the future of space travel. For the first time since joining Ava's team, Max felt like he was on the verge of something that could actually change the world. And there was no turning back. The aftermath of the successful test launch should have been a moment of celebration. The team was ecstatic, the data from the test launch confirming that Project Vanguard's propulsion system was on track to revolutionize space travel. They had finally done it. After years of research, sleepless nights, and intense pressure, they had proven that the technology could work. But in the days that followed, an unexpected unease began to creep into the lab. Despite their success, Max couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was watching them. Every time he walked into the lab, it felt like the walls were closing in a little tighter, like the weight of the world was bearing down on them. And then it came. It was a Thursday morning when Max first heard the news. Ava was standing at the whiteboard in the front of the lab, outlining the next steps for testing the system in deeper space conditions. The team was focused, taking notes, discussing the next phase. Max was at his desk, reviewing some simulations on his laptop, when his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. It was an email from Elon Musk. Subject: Opportunity to collaborate. Max froze. His fingers hovered over the keys, a knot tightening in his stomach. He opened the message. "Max, I've been following your work with Project Vanguard closely. It's impressive, to say the least. You've built something remarkable, and I think you already know where this is heading. At SpaceX, we have the resources, the infrastructure, and the scale to take this technology beyond what you could achieve on your own. You and I both know how far this system could go. So let's make this happen. I'm offering you and your team a chance to join SpaceX once again and take Project Vanguard to the next level. Together, we can build the future of space travel. Let me know when you're ready to talk. I'll be waiting. Best, Elon Musk." Max read the message twice, his mind racing. He could feel the temptation tugging at him. He knew what Elon was offering. It wasn't just resources. It was access to the world's most advanced space infrastructure, the chance to make a real impact on the space industry. It was the opportunity to work under the most ambitious entrepreneur in the world, a chance to see their work scale beyond anything they could imagine. But Max's loyalty had already been tested once, and he wasn't going to make the same mistake again. He looked up from the email to see Ava watching him, her expression unreadable. She had clearly noticed the look on his face, and she knew exactly what it meant. "What did he say?" she asked softly. Max took a deep breath and handed her his phone. Ava read the email quickly, her face a mixture of surprise and frustration. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered, passing the phone back. "He really thinks we'll just drop everything and come back to him?" Max nodded slowly, his mind processing the offer. "It's tempting, I won't lie. But this is exactly what we've been fighting against, Ava. We're not just building a propulsion system. We're building something that can change everything. SpaceX is just another company trying to dominate space. They won't understand what we're trying to do. Not the way we do. Ava rubbed her temples. I know. But damn it, Max, this is SpaceX we're talking about. The resources, the funding, the infrastructure. We could make this work faster if we had them on our side. It's hard to ignore that. Max looked at her, determination hardening his features. You and I both know that working with SpaceX isn't just about resources. It's about vision. And SpaceX's vision is about Mars. Ours is about something far greater. This system is just the beginning. We can't let them control the narrative. Ava's eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. She could see it too. The allure of joining SpaceX was powerful, but she wasn't willing to sacrifice their greater mission for short-term gain. I won't go back, Max said, the words firm in his voice. Ava nodded slowly. Neither will I. That evening, Max sat in his small office, reviewing the data from the test launch. The numbers were still fresh in his mind, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the email. There was so much potential, so many possibilities that lay just beyond the horizon. But every time he thought about SpaceX, about returning to the fold, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't what he wanted anymore. The door opened, and a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Jay, one of the engineers, his face tight with concern. Max, we've got a problem, Jay said, voice low. SpaceX isn't just offering a partnership. They're offering competition. I've been hearing rumors from some of the other aerospace companies that they're trying to secure patents on propulsion systems that are very similar to ours. And I'm starting to think they might be working on something faster than we are. Max's stomach sank. What does that mean for us? Jay hesitated before answering. It means they could be preparing to launch something before we do. They could lock us out of the market entirely. If they're successful, everything we've built could be invalidated. We're not just up against a rival company, Max. We're up against Elon Musk himself. Max stood up from his desk, running a hand through his hair. The pressure was mounting, and now it was clear. SpaceX was not just a potential ally. It was a looming threat. If they launched a similar system before they did, all of their work could be overshadowed. The tech, the funding, the fame. It would all go to Elon's team. And if they couldn't deliver something revolutionary in the next few months, Project Vanguard could be swallowed whole by the machine that was SpaceX. The next morning, the team convened for an emergency meeting. Everyone gathered around the conference table, their faces a mixture of confusion, concern, and determination. Max could feel the tension building in the room. They had worked so hard to get this far. Now, everything they had fought for was on the line. We need to decide where we go from here, Max said, addressing the group. SpaceX is circling us. They've made us an offer, and now they're actively working on a system similar to ours. If they succeed, we'll lose everything. Ava nodded. They're not playing fair. But we're not just going to roll over. Jay spoke up, his voice tense. We've got to make a decision. Do we keep pushing forward on our own? Or do we try to take them on directly? Max's eyes flickered around the room, seeing the concern in the eyes of his team. He knew what this meant. Whatever path they chose now would define the future of their work, and possibly the future of space travel itself. We don't back down, Max said firmly. We keep going. We can't let SpaceX dictate our future. We'll find a way to make this work, even if we have to do it without their resources. We have the vision. That's what matters. Ava leaned forward, determination in her eyes. Then we fight. Together. Max's heart raced as he sat at the conference table, surrounded by his team. The atmosphere was thick with tension. An unsettling quiet had settled in the room after the shocking news about SpaceX's competing project. Max could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. This wasn't just about the technology anymore. This was about survival. Their survival. We're running out of time, Ava said, her voice cutting through the silence. She sat across from Max, arms crossed tightly, her brow furrowed in thought. If SpaceX is working on something similar, they'll be in orbit before we even get another prototype launched. Max nodded, his mind racing. The test launch had been a success, but now, it felt insignificant in the face of the looming competition. They'd been on the verge of something truly groundbreaking, something that could alter the future of space exploration. But with SpaceX's resources and their aggressive approach, the window for Project Vanguard was rapidly closing. We need to accelerate everything, Max said, breaking the silence. We can't afford to fall behind. Ava looked at him, her eyes steely. You're suggesting we go full throttle? That's dangerous, Max. We're still dealing with glitches in the propulsion system. And even if we solve those issues, we need testing, validation, time. Max leaned forward, his gaze locking with hers. Ava, I'm not asking for a leap of faith. I'm asking for a commitment. We push every boundary we can. Every part of this system needs to work, and we need to get it tested in space before SpaceX can launch their version. The room was silent for a moment as the team weighed Max's words. The stakes had just been raised. It was no longer about simply proving the propulsion system's potential. It was about racing against the clock, fighting not just to be the best, but to be the first. I know it's risky, Max continued, his voice steady, but I believe in this project. I believe in every one of you. We've already made a breakthrough, and I know we can do it. We just need to go all in. The team looked at each other, exchanging glances. Max could sense their hesitation, the uncertainty lingering in the air. They were already stretched thin, their resources limited, their trust in the technology still being built. But they were also fighters. Every person in that room had joined this mission for a reason, and now was the time to prove that they had what it took to push through adversity. Ava stood up, her expression softening as she met Max's gaze. All right, we'll do it, but we have to be smart about it. No more shortcuts. We fix the issues in the system, test it properly, and launch it together. Max exhaled in relief. The team had made their decision. Thank you, he said, his voice filled with gratitude and determination. We'll move quickly. Let's do this right. Over the next few weeks, the pace of the lab accelerated. The team was working around the clock, often pulling 18-hour shifts. Every engineer, every scientist, every technician was laser-focused on solving the last of the issues. The magnetic containment system was recalibrated, the ion thrusters tested and retested. Ava oversaw the integration of the new components, while Max handled the larger vision of the project, coordinating between different teams, ensuring that everyone was aligned. But as the days passed, the strain began to show. Tired eyes, frayed nerves, the constant hum of machines filling the air. Everyone was running on fumes. Max could see the exhaustion creeping into their faces, but he also saw something else: resolve. They were determined to see this through. One morning, as the team gathered for a status update, Jay, one of the engineers, came to Max with a look of quiet concern. He held up a tablet, displaying data from their latest simulation. We've got a problem, Jay said, his voice low. The propulsion system is showing signs of stress under extended conditions. If we push it too far, there's a risk the containment could fail, possibly catastrophic failure. Max's stomach dropped as he studied the data. It wasn't the kind of news he wanted to hear. The last thing they needed was another setback. They had come so far, and now they were staring down the barrel of another obstacle. How bad is it? Max asked, his voice calm, though his mind was racing. It's not a total failure, but it's a weakness we didn't anticipate, Jay explained. At higher speeds and longer durations, the magnetic field weakens. The thrusters start to destabilize. If we don't correct it soon, we risk compromising the entire system. Max took a moment, allowing the gravity of the situation to settle in. If they couldn't fix this issue, if they couldn't get the propulsion system to function flawlessly, they wouldn't just lose the race to SpaceX. They would lose everything. He glanced around the room at his team, their faces filled with concern. But there was something else in their eyes, something that reminded him of why they'd started this journey in the first place. They had the talent. They had the knowledge. And most importantly, they had the drive to keep pushing forward. We fix it, Max said firmly, his voice carrying authority. No matter what it takes, we fix it. We're not backing down. The next few days were a blur of frantic calculations, trial and error, and sleepless nights. The team worked tirelessly to recalibrate the containment system, redesigning the magnetic field parameters and testing new components that could handle the increased stress. Jay worked with the hardware engineers to create more stable, resilient magnetic coils, while Ava oversaw the integration of these new parts, making sure everything worked in harmony. Max was present for every step, his focus unwavering. Every hour felt like an eternity. The weight of the decision to push forward with the testing weighed heavily on him, but he couldn't afford to second-guess himself now. They were so close, too close to give up. By the end of the week, the team had a new prototype ready for testing. The containment system had been strengthened, the propulsion adjusted for higher efficiency, and everything was calibrated for a longer duration test flight. The lab was quiet as the countdown began. Max stood with Ava at the control console, his pulse pounding in his ears. The whole team had gathered, their eyes fixed on the screens as they prepared for the test. "Let's do it," Max said. The words more of a command than a suggestion. Ava pressed the button. The ion thrusters powered up, humming to life. The spacecraft, tethered to the test stand, began to shake as the new propulsion system kicked in. The data on the screens was coming in fast. Every number, every figure, flashing before them. For the first few moments, nothing seemed out of place. But then came the warning light. Max's breath caught in his throat. He glanced at Ava, whose eyes were already scanning the data. The readings showed that the system was holding steady, barely. "We're close," Ava said through clenched teeth. "But we need to push the limits." Max nodded. They couldn't stop now. This was their moment. They had to make it work, no matter the cost. He leaned into the console, his eyes never leaving the screen as he watched the thrusters continue to stabilize. The magnetic field was fluctuating, but it was no longer dangerous. The craft was holding steady, and for the first time in weeks, Max allowed himself a small smile. The propulsion system was working. When the test was over, the team erupted into cheers. They had done it. The system had passed its most rigorous test yet. It wasn't perfect, there were still tweaks to be made, but it had held under the pressure. They had done what many thought was impossible. Max felt a rush of relief and excitement. But the battle wasn't over yet. They still had to prove it in space. "All right," Max said, his voice steady and filled with purpose. "Next stop, space." The morning of the launch was an eerie blend of excitement and dread. Max stood at the observation deck, staring out at the empty sky beyond. Below him, the spacecraft, a sleek, cutting-edge vessel designed to test Project Vanguard's propulsion system in space, was prepped and ready on the launch pad. It had been an exhausting few weeks, but they were finally there. The moment of truth. Max had seen rockets launch before, on TV, in the news, or from the ground at Cape Canaveral. But this was different. This was their rocket, their technology, their dream. And it wasn't just about them anymore. The stakes had never been higher. If they succeeded, they'd prove that Project Vanguard wasn't just a theoretical concept. It was real, it was viable, and it was revolutionary. But if they failed, everything they'd worked for would crumble. The world would remember this as the day their grand ambition fell short. "You okay?" Ava's voice broke through his thoughts. Max turned to see her walking toward him, her expression a mix of concern and quiet determination. He could tell she was just as anxious as he was, but she had a way of hiding it behind a calm, collected demeanor. "I'm good," he said, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about how far we've come." Ava's lips twitched into a smile of her own. "We're going to make it." "I know we are." Max didn't say anything in response. He wished he could share her certainty, but there was still a part of him that couldn't shake the nagging fear. Everything they had done, every breakthrough, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, had led to this moment. If the test launch failed, it wasn't just the project that would fail. It was the dream of a new era of space exploration. The countdown clock on the wall showed just 15 minutes remaining. The team was buzzing with activity, checking final systems and making last-minute adjustments. Jay and the other engineers were in the control room, ensuring that everything was aligned for the most critical phase of the mission. Max's mind raced. What if the propulsion system fails? What if the magnetic field destabilizes again? Every scenario played out in his mind, none of them good. But there was no going back. The team had already poured everything they had into this, and they weren't about to stop now. "Ready to go, Max?" Ava asked, her voice cutting through his thoughts. Max nodded, taking a deep breath. "Let's do this." The control room was a sea of monitors and blinking lights. The hum of machinery, the quiet clatter of keyboards, the occasional voice over the comms. Every sound felt amplified in the thick air of anticipation. Max stood at the front of the room, His eyes locked on the central screen as the countdown continued. 10 minutes to launch. Jay's voice crackled over the intercom. Systems are green across the board. We're good to go. Max glanced at Ava, who was seated beside him, watching the screens intently. Their eyes met briefly, and without words, they both knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about technology. This was their legacy, their mark on history. Max, Jay's voice cut through the momentary silence. We've got a new update. We're seeing some fluctuation in the fuel cells. It's minor, but it could cause issues with thrust if it persists. Max's heart skipped a beat. Not now. Please not now. Keep an eye on it, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Let's push ahead with the countdown. We don't have time for delays. Understood, Jay said. We'll monitor it in real time. With only 5 minutes left, the tension in the room reached a boiling point. The team was still frantically checking systems, running last-minute diagnostics, while Max and Ava stood at the front, eyes fixed on the screen. The clock was ticking, and there was no room for error. Then came the final call. 5 minutes. All systems are go. Jay's voice echoed through the room. Max felt a cold chill run down his spine. This was it. The next few minutes would determine whether Project Vanguard would soar into space or implode on the launch pad. Here we go, Ava whispered, as if trying to reassure herself as much as Max. Her fingers drummed against the armrest, the only sign of her nerves. Max glanced at the screen again. Everything was lined up. The thrusters were green, the fuel levels stable, and the propulsion system had passed every check. As far as they could tell, the test flight was set to proceed. But there was still that nagging feeling. The risk. Countdown commencing in T-1 minute, Jay announced, his voice sharp with professionalism. Max's breath felt shallow. He ran through the steps in his mind, double-checking everything. The moment the rocket lifted off, they would be able to see the system's performance in real time. They had done everything they could on the ground. Now it was up to the technology. The final 10 seconds felt like an eternity. Max's gaze shifted between Ava and the monitors, his hands gripping the rail in front of him. His pulse thrummed in his ears. 3, 2, 1. The roar of the rocket engines blasted through the control room, rattling the walls and shaking the floor beneath their feet. Max's heart leapt into his throat as the spacecraft began its ascent. It was beautiful. The rocket lifted off the pad with flawless precision, cutting through the air like a needle through fabric. For a moment, the entire room was silent, the only sound the deafening roar of the engines. Then came the cheers. The team erupted, their voices echoing through the control room as they watched their creation soar into the sky. Propulsion is steady, Jay confirmed over the intercom. We're holding a stable trajectory. Max let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The system was working. It was working perfectly. The test had begun, and everything was going according to plan. But then, just as Max was starting to relax, a new alert flashed on one of the screens. Warning: magnetic field instability detected. 10% deviation, Jay reported, his voice laced with tension. Max's heart sank. How bad is it? We're holding it together for now, Jay responded. But we need to make adjustments before we reach the upper atmosphere. The field is starting to destabilize. Max's mind raced. Not now. Not when they were so close. Is it something we can fix remotely? Ava asked, her voice steady but filled with concern. Jay's voice was calm but firm. It's going to take too long to stabilize from here. We need to act fast if we're going to maintain the system's integrity. Max's eyes scanned the data, trying to make sense of the information in front of him. The magnetic field, crucial for the propulsion system's success, was starting to falter as the spacecraft ascended into the atmosphere. They were on the verge of a catastrophic failure, one that would not only jeopardize the mission but could destroy their entire project. We need to make a decision, Max said, his voice sharp with urgency. We're too far into abort now, but we can't risk blowing this up. Ava was already moving, her fingers dancing over the control panel. I'm rerouting the power from the backup coils. That should give us enough time to stabilize the field. Max nodded, trusting her judgment. Do it. Now. Ava's fingers flew across the keys as the systems began to shift. Every second felt like an eternity. The spacecraft continued to climb higher, the roar of the engines fading as the atmospheric pressure decreased. Max held his breath, waiting for the confirmation that the adjustments had worked. Then, the data shifted. The magnetic field began to stabilize. The thrusters hummed louder, steadier. Magnetic field stabilized, Jay announced. We're holding. We're good. Max exhaled in relief. It wasn't perfect, but they had done it. The propulsion system was working. They had overcome the biggest hurdle yet. We're in the clear, Ava whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Max looked at her, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. We're not just in the clear. We're going to change the world. As the spacecraft drifted into orbit, Max knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The test wasn't over yet, but the success of the launch had already proven that Project Vanguard could change the future of space exploration. The challenges were far from over, but they had taken the first monumental step. And as he stood there, watching the spacecraft disappear into the heavens, Max couldn't help but feel that this was the moment that everything had changed. The following days after the test launch felt like a blur. The world had already begun to take notice. News outlets across the globe were buzzing with excitement over the success of Project Vanguard's launch. But for Max and his team, there was little time to celebrate. The real work had only just begun. Max sat in his office, staring at the series of congratulatory emails flooding his inbox. The headlines were everywhere. Revolutionary propulsion system tested successfully in space. Elon Musk's SpaceX faces new competitor in the race to the stars. Is this the future of space travel? It was surreal. But as Max clicked through the messages, his mind kept drifting back to the next step. What now? They had proven the propulsion system could work in space, but that was only a small part of the equation. The next phase, the real challenge, was scaling up the technology and preparing it for commercial spaceflight. They weren't just racing against SpaceX anymore. They were now up against every major aerospace company on the planet. And then there was Elon Musk himself, whose influence loomed large. SpaceX was not only the industry leader, but Musk's ambition was relentless. His vision of making life multiplanetary had captured the world's imagination. To beat him at his own game would require more than just cutting-edge technology. It would demand unprecedented innovation and speed. Max leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The pressure was mounting, and the clock was ticking. In the weeks following the successful test flight, the pace of their work only increased. The team was split into two primary divisions. One focused on improving the propulsion system for long-duration missions, and the other was tasked with developing a commercial spaceflight platform that could deliver passengers to low Earth orbit and eventually beyond. Ava, as always, was right in the thick of it. She was instrumental in overseeing the team responsible for refining the propulsion system and tweaking the power generation units that fed the thrusters. While the technology had passed its first test, there were still hurdles to overcome. We've got the propulsion sorted for a single flight, Ava explained during a team meeting one afternoon. But we still need to figure out how to make it reliable enough for long-term missions. We're talking about deep space here. These engines can't just survive. They need to thrive. Max nodded. Ava had a point. A single flight was nothing compared to the challenge of sustaining long-term travel. They needed efficiency, reliability, and safety, all in one. But Max believed they could do it. They were on the brink of something world-changing, and he wasn't about to let any obstacle stand in their way. Meanwhile, across the country, SpaceX was accelerating its own development efforts. Max had seen the reports. SpaceX's next-gen Starship had entered its final stages of testing, and the company was rumored to be planning a crewed mission to Mars within the next decade. The thought of SpaceX reaching Mars before them stung, but Max refused to be intimidated. He knew that the key to winning this race was speed and innovation, and they had a secret weapon. If they could perfect the propulsion system and make it viable for regular, large-scale use, they'd have a technological edge over anyone. SpaceX's rockets, while powerful, relied on traditional propulsion methods that were slow and inefficient compared to what they had designed. "We've got something they don't," Max said to his team one afternoon, his voice filled with renewed determination. "This system isn't just faster, it's safer, more efficient, and scalable. We can go further and faster with less fuel. And that's how we beat them." Ava raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold statement. You think the world's ready for something like this?" Max stood up, walking over to the large whiteboard in the corner of the room. He grabbed a marker and began sketching out their vision. The world doesn't need to be ready yet. We'll make them ready. Space travel is going to be the future. And when that future is here, we'll be the ones who got there first. The room fell silent as the team considered Max's words. They all knew the risks involved. Being the first to do something this ambitious was never easy. But the spark of excitement was unmistakable. They were on the verge of something monumental. As the weeks went by, media attention continued to build, and the pressure on Max's team only intensified. There were interviews to do, pitches to investors, and constant requests for updates. But it was a particular phone call that shook things up. One morning, Max received an unexpected call from an unknown number. When he answered, it was a voice he recognized immediately, Elon Musk's. Musk's voice was calm, but there was an undeniable edge to it. I've been following your project. Impressive work. But I have to ask, what exactly do you think you're doing? Max paused, his mind racing. He hadn't expected this. He knew Musk wasn't one to shy away from competition, but this was something different. This was a direct challenge. We're pushing the boundaries of space travel, Max said, his voice measured, just like you've been doing with SpaceX. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Well, here's the thing, Musk finally said. You might be ahead of us in some areas, but we're moving fast, and we don't plan on losing. You might want to watch your back. Max, SpaceX plays for keeps. Max didn't flinch. He had prepared for this. He had known that Musk wouldn't let their success slide without responding. But this was personal. I'll take that as a compliment, Max said, his voice steady. But let me be clear. We're not trying to beat you. We're trying to change the game. There was a slight chuckle on the other end. Let's see who changes it first. Good luck, Max. The line went dead. The conversation left Max feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. Musk's words had been pointed, but they also showed something else, respect. Musk saw Project Vanguard as a genuine threat, and that was exactly what Max needed. If SpaceX considered them a real competitor, it meant they were onto something big. But now, it was war. With the eyes of the world on them, Max knew that they had to act quickly. SpaceX was already planning its next move, and Max had no intention of waiting for them to pull ahead. The race to the stars had just become personal. Max gathered the team in their makeshift war room the next day, the gravity of the situation settling over them like a thick fog. This isn't just about proving we can do it anymore, Max said, his voice resolute. We're up against the biggest name in space exploration. But we have one thing they don't. We've got the future of space travel in our hands. If we can perfect this propulsion system and get it to work in a way that's scalable and efficient, we'll change everything. We'll change the way humanity explores the stars. Ava, her arms crossed, nodded. I don't need convincing. Let's finish this. The team was with him, every one of them. They had all believed in the vision from the start. And now, they could feel the stakes. It wasn't just about technology. It was about history. It was about the future. And they were going to take it. The weeks after Elon Musk's phone call passed in a blur. The team's work on Project Vanguard ramped up to an intensity none of them had anticipated. Max had known from the start that they were in a race against the future, but now it felt more real than ever. SpaceX wasn't just another competitor. They were a looming giant, a formidable force with nearly unlimited resources and decades of experience. And yet, Max couldn't shake the belief that they were the ones who held the key to the future. The media had shifted its focus to the growing competition between Project Vanguard and SpaceX, with headlines like, Musk versus Max, the space race heats up. But Max knew that the world's attention wouldn't be enough to propel them forward. It was their innovation, their courage, and their drive that would lead them to victory or failure. Max paced around the conference room, where the entire team had gathered for what would be the most important meeting of their lives. A large screen at the front displayed the latest updates from their testing and engineering teams. The propulsion system had passed several key tests over the last few weeks, but there was still much work to do. SpaceX's Starship program had launched several successful missions, and their Mars colonization plans were picking up steam. Time was running out. We've made progress, Ava said, looking over the data, but we need to push faster. The longer we wait, the more we risk falling behind. SpaceX isn't just sitting idle. They're closing in on their Mars mission. Max nodded. I know. But this isn't just about getting to Mars before Musk. It's about revolutionizing space travel, making it sustainable, affordable, and accessible. The world is looking for a breakthrough, and we're the ones who can give it to them. The team was silent for a moment, reflecting on Max's words. The pressure was immense, but so was the opportunity. They weren't just competing for the first to reach Mars. They were fighting to define the next chapter in human history. Okay, here's the plan, Max said, breaking the silence. We're going to accelerate testing. We'll triple our efforts, push our propulsion system to the limit, and get it ready for a crewed mission. We don't just need to prove the technology works. We need to show that it's ready for real-world applications. No more waiting. Ava looked at him, her expression serious. You're talking about a crewed mission already? We haven't even launched a fully autonomous flight to low Earth orbit yet. Max's eyes didn't waver. If we wait too long, SpaceX will have the entire market. The longer we sit on the sidelines, the more we lose our edge. I want to put our system to the test. I want to show the world that we're not just another private space company. We're the future. The room was charged with tension. Max's words hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone knew what was at stake. If they succeeded, they'd change the world. If they failed, it could be the end of Project Vanguard. After a long pause, Jay, the lead engineer, spoke up. You're right, Max. We've been playing it safe for too long. Let's do it. Let's push this thing to the edge. The following weeks were a blur of activity. The team worked around the clock, tweaking the propulsion system and refining the spacecraft design. They built new prototypes, tested new systems, and put everything to the test. There were moments of doubt, of course. Every new challenge felt like an insurmountable obstacle. But through it all, there was a sense of unity, a shared belief in their vision. Ava was the first to confirm the propulsion system's readiness for an uncrewed mission to low Earth orbit. They'd pushed the system harder than ever before, and now it was time to see if it could deliver. Max, she said one afternoon, eyes glued to the monitors, we're ready. If we want to make our move, this is it. The system is stable, the trajectory's locked in, we've got everything in place for the launch. Max's heart raced. This was it. The launch they'd been working toward for so long. And it wasn't just a test anymore. It was a statement. A statement to SpaceX. A statement to the world. The launch day arrived with all the anticipation of a historic event. The media was buzzing, broadcasting live feeds from the launch site. Spectators from around the world tuned in to watch, eager to witness what they hoped would be a breakthrough in space travel. The launch pad stood silent in the early morning light, the spacecraft towering above, gleaming in the sunlight. The propulsion system had undergone hundreds of simulations, tweaks, and tests. Now, all that was left was the final countdown. Max stood at the observation deck with Ava, Jay, and the rest of the team. Their faces were a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. There was no turning back now. Everything they had worked for had led to this moment. 5 minutes to launch, a voice crackled over the intercom. The countdown had begun. Max's pulse quickened. This was real. He glanced over at Ava, who gave him a reassuring nod. They had come so far. They weren't about to back down now. As the countdown continued, Max felt a surge of adrenaline. The system was ready. The crew was ready. All that was left was to watch. 10, 9, 8. The sound of the engines firing up filled the air, and Max felt the ground beneath his feet tremble as the rocket's thrusters ignited. The spacecraft began to rumble, pushing against the gravitational pull of the Earth. 3, 2, 1, ignition. With a deafening roar, the spacecraft shot up into the sky. The crowd cheered, but for Max and his team, it was more than just the launch. It was the realization of a dream. A dream that had begun years ago in a makeshift lab, fueled by nothing but passion and determination. The rocket ascended into the sky, its trail leaving a streak across the blue expanse. Max watched, his heart in his throat, as the spacecraft passed through the clouds and into the vastness of space. Propulsion systems are stable, Jay reported over the intercom. Trajectory locked in. We're on course. Max exhaled, the tension in his body easing as he watched the spacecraft continue its ascent. They had done it. They had proven that their propulsion system could work in space, and now they were one step closer to their ultimate goal, to change the way humanity traveled through the stars. But even as the spacecraft reached orbit and the team celebrated their success, Max couldn't ignore the fact that the real challenge was just beginning. SpaceX had already begun planning its next move, and Max knew they wouldn't rest until they had perfected their own propulsion system. The competition was only going to get fiercer from here. However, Max wasn't worried. He had a vision, and with his team by his side, he knew they could make it a reality. The race to the stars was no longer about who was first. It was about who could change the game. And Max was determined to do just that. As he watched the spacecraft disappear into the depths of space, Max couldn't help but smile. The future was finally within their reach. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?